Chapter 45-26. Good. Seeing the flying boat pass through the golden light, Xiao Hua's heart immediately calmed down. He secretly cheered, but just as he was about to open his mouth, he heard a woo. Two more beast cries rang out. The two immortal kites actually broke through the golden light and pounced towards the flying boat at the same time. Damn it! Xiao Hua was surprised, but he did not panic. True Qi flowed out of his body as he waved his arms outside the flying boat. Two huge fists appeared in front of the flying jade immortal beast's sharp claws. The golden fist met the sharp claws of the flying crane immortal beasts. Boom boom! Two loud explosions sounded. At the same time that the golden light shattered, the two flying crane immortal beasts were also sent tumbling away. Ha ha ha! Xiao Hua howled. This is awesome. As he spoke, Xiao Hua raised his hand and grabbed something in his pocket. After that, he tossed it towards the back of the flying ship. Rumble. The jade talismans that were refined using natural primordial water exploded one after another. Even though not every single one of them was able to injure the flying ship, they were still able to resist the flying ship's attack. Of course, Xiao Hua's attack was just a drop in the bucket. The flying jade immortal beasts that had rushed out of the spatial fragment were still tightly chasing after the flying boat. Moreover, even more flying jade immortal beasts were enraged and began to flap their wings madly to chase after the flying boat. Senior. Xiao Hua flew in front of Fairy Xingyu and complained, "How can these flying jade immortal beasts fly out of the spatial fragment? Can't those spatial restrictions stop them?" Fairy Xingyu rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua and said, "Who told you that the immortal beasts and demonic beasts in the spatial fragment can't come out? Since when did the spatial fragment have restrictions?" Okay. Xiao Hua did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Just pretend I didn't say anything. Senior, go and rest for a while. Leave this to me." "You." Fairy Xingyu was a little worried. Xiao Hua smiled and said proudly, "I'm a human Mahayana realm cultivator. In the spatial fragment of the immortal realm, I was weak. How can I still be a scholar here? This is the immortal imperial equipment of the heavenly court." Fairy Xingyu reminded him. Even the direct disciples of the four great families can't control it very well. Xiao Hua pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "Then Junior will give it a try. If there's anything inappropriate, how about Senior immediately take over?" Fairy Xingyu was also exhausted at this time and had been desperately holding on. Although they had already rushed out of the fragment of the immortal realm, the flying boat had already fallen into the meteor belt and there were thousands of immortal phalanx beasts chasing after them. Xiao Hua was the only Daoist Grand Ascension stage cultivator on the flying boat who was not injured, so who else could she rely on but him? "Come on." Fairy Xingyu nodded. However, she didn't dare to withdraw her celestial qi. She still kept half of it. Xiao Hua stood where Fairy Xingyu was and looked around. The flying boat was in imminent danger. Not to mention that the defense of the entire flying boat had been breached, the flying jade immortal beasts near the flying boat had also begun to accumulate power, preparing to spit out fire pillars. The corners of Xiao Hua's mouth curled up as he activated the 5 Qi unification genuine Qi in his middle dantian. Boom! As the golden light around Xiao Hua shone brightly, 5 colored clouds rushed into the flying boat under his feet like a waterfall. Buzz buzz buzz. The entire airship let out an ear-piercing roar. Then, on the airship, with Xiao Hua as the center, 5 colored rings of light rotated like a windmill. In just a moment, the entire airship was dyed red. Shua! Like the finishing touch of a divine brush, 5 colored clouds rushed out from both sides of the airship and instantly protected the airship. Boom! At this moment, another flying jade immortal beast pounced from the bottom of the flying boat and the fire pillar hit the flying boat. As soon as the fire pillar came into contact with the flying boat, the 5 colored clouds immediately dissipated. However, as the fire pillar was annihilated, the clouds continued to surge and quickly protected the flying boat. Roar! The flying jade immortal beast roared and flew again, smashing its huge tail at the flying boat. Unfortunately, as soon as it swung its tail, the flying boat flashed past and rushed out faster than light. Where the tail landed, the flying boat was nowhere to be seen. Boom! The flying jade immortal beast's tail did not miss. It hit another flying jade immortal beast that swooped down on the opposite side. Caught off guard, the flying jade immortal beast was shot down 1,000 feet. It was only 1,000 feet, but life and death were decided. The invisible boundary hurricane blew down and slashed diagonally on the flying jade immortal beast's tail. The huge tail flashed with crimson light and layers of marks appeared. As soon as the marks appeared, they quickly dispersed and clusters of runes rushed out. Boom! In the void, an inexplicable aura gushed out. However, as soon as this aura appeared, it was blown away by the boundary hurricane. Then, with a crisp cracking sound, the flying jade immortal beast's tail broke into several pieces. Roar! The flying jade immortal beast seemed to be in pain and lost its balance. It spread its wings again and wanted to fly up. Unfortunately, as soon as the wings landed, the boundary hurricane came out again. With a loud rumble, the wings that were almost bone were also broken. The flying jade immortal beast fell diagonally into the hurricane. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Faint sounds of wind could be heard as the kite immortal beast howled in pain. Its powerful body seemed to have been pinched by a giant hand, and its bones were crushed one by one. When the kite immortal beast's body was completely crushed, it fell another few thousand feet and was hit by an even fiercer realm storm. Ow! The kite immortal beast weakly groaned a few times before a bloody light appeared. The kite immortal beast was neatly cut into dozens of pieces of flesh and blood. These pieces of flesh only fell a few dozen feet before they were blown away by the realm storm and turned into nothingness. Roar! When a flying jade immortal beast was killed by the boundary hurricane, more flying jade immortal beasts rushed over from all directions and pounced on the flying boat. The loud whistling of the wind and the roaring of the flying boat had already covered the screams. Not many flying jade immortal beasts could see the blood of the dead. They only had eyes for the delicious flesh of the human race. Looking at the flying boat again, it did not directly rush towards the triangular space fragment as Fairy Xingyu had expected. Instead, it soared rapidly in the nearby space, like a proud phoenix spreading its colorful wings and dancing among the many ferocious beasts. Thousands of flying jade immortal beasts covered the nearby meteor belt. They roared and pounced on the flying boat, but the fire pillars and sharp claws missed the flying boat every time. Not to mention the disciples of the scholarly cultivator families who were frightened and pale. Even Fairy Xingyu, who was adjusting her breath with her eyes closed, had a slight change in expression. Seeing that the flying jade immortal beasts were angered by his provocation, Xiao Hua laughed loudly. The golden light around him soared into the sky again. The flying boat shook again and flew in a spiral toward the triangular space fragment in the meteor belt. Roar! A group of flying jade immortal beasts roared crazily and chased after the flying boat. Unfortunately, they had only flown a few hundred feet when the mysterious boundary hurricane immediately attacked. The powerful flying jade immortal beasts were squashed one by one and torn apart when they fell to the ground. Seeing this, the flying jade immortal beasts who were close to the flying boat panicked and began to flee left and right. However, the more they fled, the more they were killed. The flying jade immortal beasts behind them did not know what was going on. They still chased after Xiao Hua's flying boat. Just like before, after another 1,000 feet, countless blood clots were scattered again. The entire meteor belt was filled with blood mist. So this is what he's planning. Upon seeing Xiao Hua fly towards the triangular spatial fragment and kill a large number of flying crane immortal beasts every time he zigzagged for 10,000 feet, Fairy Xingyu finally understood. Although it's a little difficult to fly over this triangular spatial fragment, there are many realm tornadoes along the way. The thousands of flying jade immortal beasts will chase us endlessly. If we don't kill them in this meteor belt, we won't have a chance in the future. If we lead them to the triangular space fragment, we won't have a chance of survival. Even the triangular space fragment will become a land of death in the future. However, thinking of this, Fairy Xingyu deliberately turned her head and saw that the fragment of the immortal realm had turned into several irregular fragments. These fragments were still splitting and shrinking. It wouldn't be long before they completely turned into stardust and disappeared in the meteor belt. However, if these flying jade immortal beasts don't fly out of the space fragment, I think. Alas, there's nothing to think about. These flying jade immortal beasts are ferocious beasts in the immortal realm. They are extremely powerful and have the power to fly out of the space fragment. If they are lucky enough to fly to the other side of the meteor belt, I'm afraid all the human clan cultivators and great demons of the demon clan will be killed. While Fairy Xingyu was thinking, Xiao Hua steered the flying boat and flew for more than 10,000 feet. At this time, the flying boat was much closer to the triangular space fragment. A faint fragrance began to emerge in the space around the flying boat. After the flying boat, there were no more flying jade immortal beasts that could safely chase after them. The hundreds of flying jade immortal beasts closest to them were being killed by the boundary hurricanes. After this slaughter, thousands of flying jade immortal beasts, who were panicking like headless flies, began to flee in all directions toward the meteor belt in the face of death. Hundreds of them even wanted to return to the space fragment of the immortal realm. Unfortunately, what greeted them was only the cruelty of heaven and earth. What greeted them was only the resentment of the human clan cultivators they had killed earlier. They had no choice but to die. Seeing the flying jade immortal beasts being killed one by one, Fairy Xingyu's heart finally calmed down. Calmly, she smelled a strange fragrance near the flying boat. Fairy Xingyu seemed to have thought of something. A smile appeared on her face and she closed her eyes. Shuji and Fairy Xingyu cultivated quietly. Xiao Hua activated his golden body and 5 Qis unifications. He opened his delusion breaker Dharma Eye and focused on controlling the immortal imperial equipment. The disciples of the 4 great families and the other families on the flying boat were dumbfounded. They had seen the power of the flying jade immortal beasts. They had never thought that there would be a human clan cultivator in this world who could easily kill thousands of flying jade immortal beasts. Chapter 45-27. However, they had no choice but to believe it. Moreover, this human Grand Ascension stage cultivator was the creator of the Fortune Gate who had refreshed the entire mysterious yellow list. He was also the person who had unveiled the new era of the 3 continents. In the face of such a human Grand Ascension stage cultivator, their pride and self-confidence were nothing but dust. In the face of such a human cultivator, there was only reverence. Of course, there was only reverence. Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hongyue, Nangong Pingping, and Beiming Qihan looked at the 5-colored light below Xiao Hua with shock in their eyes. They looked at each other and exchanged glances. Then, a look of determination appeared in their eyes. Initially, Xiao Hua didn't know that the flying crane immortal beasts could fly out of spatial fragments. However, when he was searching for spatial fragments, he still took into account the flying crane immortal beast's pursuit. Just as Xiao Hua had expected, when he arrived in front of a triangular spatial fragment, the last flying crane immortal beast had been killed in the meteor belt. He couldn't use his spiritual sense in the meteor belt, but he could slightly release his spiritual sense. The greedy Xiao Hua naturally wouldn't let go of the flying crane immortal beast's soul. He had driven the flying boat through the flying crane immortal beast pack not only to provoke the flying crane immortal beast's anger, but also to search for its soul. There! Fairy Xingyu, who was meditating, didn't turn around when she heard the cries stop. She only looked at the approaching triangular spatial fragment and pointed in a certain direction. All right. Xiao Hua smiled and urged the flying boat to fly in the direction Fairy Xingyu had pointed out. After flying for thousands of feet, the triangular starlight of the space fragment changed. Under the starlight, clusters of clouds gushed out like willow catkins. The starlight also showed 5 colors at this time. Amidst the starlight, clouds covered the starlight, and a flower-like halo gradually bloomed as Xiao Hua urged the flying boat to speed up. The direction that Fairy Xingyu was pointing to was one of the petals of the flower. Naturally, Xiao Hua had also smelled the exotic fragrance. A tranquil mood arose spontaneously. The golden body that had been activated due to the fierce battle gradually faded away, and the delusion breaker Dharma eyes, which had been opened painfully, also slowly closed. As the airboat crashed into the halo, Xiao Hua felt a flash in front of his eyes. Then, an indescribably wonderful scene appeared in front of his eyes. It was a world of flowers. The entire land was covered with flower buds of various colors. Some were purple, some were red, and some were yellow. All kinds of colors bloomed beautifully on the land. All kinds of flowers on the ground were also covered in gorgeous colors. Green vines intertwined between the flowers. Even though the vines looked like they were covered in thorns, there were still bits and pieces of Xiaohua's naughty blooming. Looking at the left side of the airboat, there were layers of colorful clouds in the sky, which also looked like flowers. Inexplicable heavenly light fell on these colorful clouds, and wisps of brilliance gushed out from the clouds. An even more refined flowery appearance filled the entire sky. Swoosh! It seemed to be the sound of the wind, but it also seemed to be the sound of rain. Sweet and soft sounds came from all around, like a low melody. Xiaohua couldn't help but withdraw his genuine qi and carefully remove the defense of the airboat, allowing the fine rain to fall on his body, face, and eyebrows. The wind was fragrant, and the rain was sweet. In the hazy drizzle, the whole world began to be intoxicated. What he liked the most was the sound of a clear spring flowing in the wind and rain. The pure sound fell into everyone's ears. Although no one had seen the spring water, they could already imagine how clear the spring water was. The cool breeze rose again, and thousands of branches and leaves rustled in the wind. It was as if they were singing, and also as if they were dancing. In just a moment, the singing had already filled the entire space, and the dance had already covered the earth. Xiaohua stood there for a long time, looking at the ground that seemed to have been washed by water. The gorgeous flowers were like smiling faces. The drizzle didn't wet his body, but his heart was already wet. He took a long breath of the moist air, and a cool feeling instantly spread all over his body. It turns out that the world can be so beautiful. Xiaohua couldn't help but murmur, "It's so beautiful that I don't want to disturb it." Xiaohua, who had always taken advantage of every opportunity, had the rare thought of letting Xiaoguo out at this time. Xiaohua. At this time, Fairy Xingyu opened her eyes, looked at the intoxicated Xiaohua, and said with a smile, "What do you think of this space fragment?" "Beautiful." Xiaohua thought for a moment and only said this word. It seemed that he had already remembered the word literary in his mind. Only this word could represent his mood. Fairy Xingyu didn't comment. She raised her hand and pointed at the road. "Do you see the flower path on the ground?" Xiaohua lowered his head. Sure enough, among the thousands of flowers, there was a seemingly winding path. It passed through the flower field, slanted over the high slope, and disappeared into the dreamlike rain and fog. "Just fly along this flower path." After Fairy Xingyu finished speaking, she closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing again. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. Although he was reluctant to give up the beautiful scenery, he still urged the flying boat and released his divine sense. He carefully took precautions and flew along the flower path into the distance. After flying for a while, Xiaohua had already sensed the awe-inspiring qi in this space fragment. He understood that this must be a fragment of some Confucian cultivation world. Seeing Xiaohua urging the flying boat in front of them, Dongfang Yushan and the other disciples of the aristocratic families didn't dare to disturb him. After waiting for a few hours, a rare mountain ridge appeared in front of the flying boat. Xiaohua's divine sense swept over it, and he couldn't help but be surprised. When Xiaohua urged the flying boat to land on the mountain ridge, a dazzling meteor belt appeared in front of everyone's eyes again. Xiaohua looked at Fairy Xingyu, who had a strange smile on her face, and asked curiously, "Senior, how did you find the exit of the space fragment so easily? Could this be an illusion?" Hee. Fairy Xingyu enjoyed Xiaohua's surprise very much. She covered her mouth and laughed. "Who told you that you have to fight to the death in every space fragment? Actually, to be honest, we didn't come to the Star Moon Palace to risk our lives. Many space fragments are as quiet and peaceful as this flower realm. There's no need for dharmic powers, divine abilities, or even flying. As long as you walk obediently, you'll definitely find the exit. Otherwise, how could I let the Star Moon Palace be a reward from Zhai Xinglu?" Xiaohua, who was used to seeing bloody trials, smiled bitterly. He shook his head, flew up from the flying boat, and placed his hands behind his back. There were no clouds under his feet as he slowly landed among the flowers. Although his feet were a little muddy, Xiaohua didn't mind. Instead, he walked step by step. With a glance, Another kind of feeling was born in his heart. It was as if he had suddenly returned to the sea of flowers tens of thousands of years ago. In that pavilion, there was a beautiful woman, 2 fiery hearts, 3 cups of heartless wine, and 4 affectionate eyes. Is she okay? The flowers turned into a person again. The beautiful, strong, gentle, and generous Xin Xin. Xiao Hua could leave freely, but on the flying boat, how many dared to leave? Dongfang Yushan and the others stood there respectfully, not daring to say a word. You all can go too. It's rare to encounter this flower realm, and there might not be another one in the future. Enjoy the beautiful scenery here. Don't let down God's good intentions. Fairy Xingyu suddenly opened her eyes. On her face, which couldn't be seen clearly, droplets of rain had condensed into water droplets, falling along the silver light on her face. If one wasn't careful, one would mistake these water droplets for tears. Dongfang Yushan and the others were puzzled, but they didn't dare to refute. After respectfully agreeing, they flew out of the flying boat one after another. Then, according to the aristocratic families, they flew to different places. By the way, don't damage the flowers here. Fairy Xingyu's voice sounded in everyone's ears at the same time. Every flower here has a story, and every petal has a memory. You can't afford to pay for it. Yes, we understand. Everyone was even more puzzled. However, when they looked at Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyu, who were sitting on the flying boat, they became thoughtful. Of course, it was really difficult for ordinary people to not touch the flowers. However, it was easy for these disciples of the aristocratic families of Confucian cultivators. They only needed to urge the clouds slightly to ensure that they wouldn't get close to the flowers. Naturally, they wouldn't damage the flowers. However, how could such a beautiful scenery be compared to the beautiful scenery in Xiao Hua's eyes? Seeing that the disciples of the aristocratic families were following the rules, Fairy Xingyu smiled bitterly. She retracted her gaze and looked at Shu Ji, who was not far away, whose silver light had begun to fade. Her eyes were filled with sweetness. She whispered, Shu Ji, it seems that your divination skill is really useful. We've searched for the flower realm several times, but we didn't encounter it. Xiao Hua actually came in again by accident. With that, Fairy Xingyu floated up and walked to the side of the flying boat. Looking at the beautiful land, she didn't care if Shuji could hear her. She continued, Do you remember the ecstasy we felt when we first discovered the Star Moon Palace? Do you remember the surprise we felt when we first came to this flower realm? I really didn't expect that there would be such a world of flowers in this world. For this kind of beauty, there would be no towering trees, no huge mountains that would destroy this beauty, and no wild beasts that would destroy these flowers. How could I not remember? Shuji's voice, which had always been calm, was now filled with a strange emotion. It was in this field of flowers that my hand, which had always been in charge of punishing immortal weapons, actually plucked a flower. Although this flower withered as soon as it was inserted into your hair, that moment of youth had long been engraved in my heart. I knew that from now on, not to mention the disputes in the immortal world, not to mention staying in the mortal world forever, even if the immortal 3 decays, my heart would not be defeated. Shuji. Shuji's words were 100 times more potent than any poison in the world. In an instant, Fairy Xingyu had been poisoned. Not only was her heart broken, but her eyes were also tired. Even her immortal body was weak. Chapter 45-28. Fairy Xingyu's mouth was filled with a sweet fragrance that was comparable to the sweetness of the flower realm. Her languid voice was a little greasy, and her eyes were moist. She looked at Shu Ji and said in a low voice, You can actually say such shameful things. I thought you were like heavenly thunder, only upright and cold. I still remember you carefully burying the withered flower in the soil with heartache. I also remember you saying that when we came back, we would go and see the new flower together. However, it's been a long time since then. Even if there were more than 10 flowers, they would have withered, let alone one. Don't worry, Shuji. I've already seen it. The flowers have grown again. The flowers are different, but my feelings are still the same. Fairy Xingyu was a little flustered. She hurriedly said, as if she was confessing her feelings. Yes. Shuji did not show his appearance. He only said in the silver light, "There are many female cultivators who love flowers, but I've never seen a female cultivator who buried flowers. Xingyue, although you are strong, bad-tempered, unyielding in your words, and even have many schemes in your heart, just seeing you bury flowers is like seeing a real Xingyue. I think you may be the person I should meet in this life." Chimpage. Fairy Xingyu pouted and said with a smile, "Have you met many female cultivators? I thought your story of burying flowers was already a very sad and beautiful story, but looking at Xiao Hua now, I seem to see an even more sad and beautiful picture. I think Xiao Hua is also a person with a story in his heart." Shuji did not know whether he was intentional or not, but he brought the topic to Xiao Hua again. Xingyue Fairy seemed unwilling to break the sweetness at this time. She also nodded and said, "You're right. According to the records in the Hall of Heroes, Xiao Hua doesn't have a dual cultivation partner. This makes me feel very strange." Shuji immediately thought of Juxia, who was mentioned by Xiao Hua. He was about to speak, but he felt that it was inappropriate, so he did not continue. Fairy Xingyu said again, however, "It is said that he met a female cultivator named Li Jing at the Jade Pavilion conference. Later, the two of them traveled together for a while and went their separate ways. Oh, and..." At this point, Fairy Xingyu actually looked around, lowered her voice, and said with a smile, "I also have an extremely secret news. Xiao Hua seems to have colluded with the 9th princess of immortal Emperor Go Chen. How is that possible?" Shuji scoffed without even thinking about it. "I'm afraid you're just guessing. Darling Shu, you must trust the intuition of a female cultivator," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile. "Although there is no such news in the world, I can still see some clues from the time when Xiao Hua disappeared and the place and time when the new princess appear. What's more, didn't you see that the flying boat that Xiao Hua just used is the Heavenly Court's immortal imperial equipment? If Xiao Hua doesn't understand the 5 Qis unification technique, how can he activate it? This has nothing to do with the new princess, right?" Shuji smiled bitterly. Fairy Xingyu blinked mischievously and said with a smile, "How about I tell him the news that the new princess has been suppressed and see his reaction?" "If there is no Confucian family here, you can just say it," Shuji warned. "If you say it in front of them, won't you be causing trouble for Xingyu?" I know," Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, "I'll just send a voice transmission." At this point, Fairy Xingyu's smile slowly disappeared. She looked into the distance and said, "The Dongfang family really can't hold back anymore. Dongfang Yushan has gone to find Xiao Hua." "Xingyu," Shuji suddenly said, "let's not talk about these mundane things. I remember the last time you came to the Flower Realm, putting aside the fact that the two immortals were greatly moved by the fragmented space, Dongfang Yushan moved his body and landed beside Xiao Hua. He looked at the muddy water on the flower path and frowned slightly. He gritted his teeth and hesitated again. At this time, Xiao Hua's voice rang out, "You are a disciple of the Dongfang family, right? Why are you looking for me?" Dongfang Yushan was overjoyed. He was afraid that Xiao Hua would ignore him, so he hurriedly bowed and said, "I am Dongfang Yushan, a direct descendant of the Dongfang family. I deserve to die for disturbing Senior's flower viewing." Xiao Hua replied indifferently, "Since you already know, why bother coming over? To tell you the truth, I'm also a person of culture. Whenever I see beautiful scenery, I'll linger on it." Dongfang Yushan said with a smile, "However, I have a question today. If I don't ask Senior, it'll be like a fishbone stuck in my throat. I'll turn a deaf ear to the beautiful scenery in front of me." "You're talking about the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification, right?" Xiao Hua replied, hitting the nail on the head. Yes. Dongfang Yushan didn't expect Xiao Hua to be so straightforward. He didn't hide anything at all. When he answered, even his voice trembled a little. "Senior, I have the cultivation method of the 5 Qis unification." Xiao Hua didn't deny it. Instead, he answered truthfully, "However, this cultivation method belongs to a good friend of mine. I've only received some guidance from him. And without his approval, I can't tell anyone about this cultivation method." "Then, who is Senior's good friend? Where is he?" Dongfang Yushan hurriedly asked. My good friend is called Wen Chu. Xiao Hua smiled. As for where he is, that's not something I can know. However, when I return to the hidden immortal mainland, I'm sure he'll hear the news and go to the soaring dragon mountain range to find me. That's good, that's good. Dongfang Yushan smiled. To be honest, the cultivation method of the 5 qis unification has been lost for a long time. Not to mention the immortal palace, even the 4 great families don't have the complete cultivation method. If Senior's good friend can teach the cultivation method of the 5 qis unification to the 4 great families, when Xiao Hua heard this, he immediately waved his hand and said, "You don't have to tell me about this. Just look for Wen Chu in the future." Yes, yes. Dongfang Yushan nodded like a chick pecking at rice. I know. What I want to say is that I've already discussed it with the other 3 great families. After your trip to the Star Moon Palace, you must come. Oh, no, after we arrive at the Star Moon Palace, we'll definitely ask the family head to send an envoy to invite Senior to the 4 great families. Moreover, if it's possible, I hope that Senior will first accept the invitation from the Dongfang family. As he spoke, Dongfang Yushan carefully took out an exquisite square jade piece and respectfully handed it over. This jade piece was in the shape of a bamboo flower. Every fine line on the bamboo flower was carved with exquisite skill. Under the sunlight, the color of the surrounding flowers was reflected. This jade piece was actually similar to the bamboo flower. Moreover, Xiao Hua had no doubt that as long as he activated his true qi and let it fall on this jade piece, this bamboo flower might slowly bloom. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua was curious and also self-aware. He was just thinking about Xin Xin from the Immortal Palace. How could he accept the Dongfang family's bamboo flower first? Moreover, not to mention that this bamboo flower was ugly, to send flowers. No matter what, he had to find a female cultivator who was more beautiful than the flowers, more beautiful than the jade, right? How could Xiao Hua dare to accept a flower sent by a man? Xiao Hua smiled slightly and did not turn around. Instead, he continued to look at the sea of flowers in the distance and said, "I've just killed thousands of immortal beasts and am now using the scenery here to cleanse my mortal heart and murderous nature. Let's talk about these mortal matters later." Yes, this junior understands. Dongfang Yushan was already prepared for Xiao Hua's rejection. He didn't think that a supreme grandmaster like him had the right to invite a grand ascension stage human being to the Dongfang family, so he stowed the invitation card away up his sleeve before bidding farewell to Xiao Hua and departing. Not only did Dongfang Yushan's actions fall into the eyes of Fairy Xing Yu and Shimen Hengyue, but in all fairness, even if they were the ones to go forward, they would also seek greater benefits for their sects. However, they were still relieved that Xiao Hua didn't accept the invitation. There was naturally no day or night in the spatial fragment. The sky was neither dark nor dim and was always so gentle. The entire flower realm was like a huge flower bud, sweet and tranquil. No one knew what the others were thinking, but Xiao Hua was minding his own business as he walked through the muddy flower path. He looked very leisurely and at ease. If he were to change into a white scholarly robe, he would look like a distinguished scholar. In particular, Xiao Hua's temperament had undergone an indescribable change after peeking into the inheritance of Qingqiu Mountain. He involuntarily exuded the aura of spring amidst the myriad of colors. It was rare for a scholarly family to have a few women, so they would occasionally steal glances at his elegant and distinguished figure from the corner of their eyes. The flower realm wasn't all drizzling. After a few hours, there was wind again. The wind was a little tipsy and blew through the air, either sweeping up some of the flowers or mixing in some of the earth's fragrance. His nose and mouth were a little moist, and the ground beneath his feet was already solid. Looking at the ground in the distance, the flowers were completely translucent with droplets of water. The wind swayed the branches of the flowers, and the droplets of water either fell or slowly evaporated. Wisps of mist had appeared in the flower realm at some point in time. The wind wasn't strong, so it couldn't blow the mist away. Instead, it swept the mist away and gradually dispersed it. The mist was also strange. It didn't fly too high and only covered the flowers. If it was a foot higher, the mist would dissipate. Seeing the mist cover the delicate features of the flowers like a veil, revealing a kind of hazy beauty, Xiao Hua was intoxicated. Such a beautiful scene should only exist in the heavens. He didn't know when it would descend to the mortal world. After another few hours, the mist gradually grew thicker. The clouds in the sky seemed to be jealous of the delicate features of the flowers. They tore apart and fell down, filling up the entire world and covering everyone's eyes. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Just as Xiao Hua was pondering what other scenery there was, the sound of rain falling could be heard. First, the raindrops were like stars, drop by drop. Soon after, the raindrops were like threads, entwining endlessly. In the end, the curtain of rain was like a waterfall, pouring down with a ladle. Chapter 45-29. Xiao Hua was naturally not afraid of the rain. He squatted down and looked at the nameless orange-red flowers in front of him. These flowers first swayed gently when the rain fell, as if they could not bear the burden. When the rain became heavier, the branches of the flowers also tilted, but the branches seemed to be resisting, straightening from time to time. However, the petals also began to fall. The heavy rain fell like a torrent, splashing loudly. The entire branch of the flowers had completely fallen. The flowers in the rain were very miserable. The petals fell one by one, and the whole ground was covered in fallen petals. The petals floated gloomily in the watery water. How could they be as bright as before? People's hearts always change. There will always be a time when it blooms. Xiao Hua's heart felt a little strange. He looked at the sky and wanted to disperse the rain clouds, but after a moment, he sighed and let out a low groan. With a sway of his body, he landed on the flying boat again. Shu Ji and Fairy Xing Yu were both satisfied and did not care about the rain. The two of them seemed to be holding hands. Xiao Hua turned around and let go. Xiao Hua smiled slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw that Shu Ji's body was still covered in silver light. His heart sank unconsciously. He frowned and said, "Senior, what about your physical body? Didn't you say that there will always be a time when it blooms?" "There's always a time for flowering," Shu Ji said calmly. "It's time for me to change my physical body. Don't worry." "That's good." Shu Ji had actually said this before. Xiao Hua nodded slightly and said, "According to the Buddhist sect, the physical body is a bag of skin. It's the most burdensome, that's what the Buddhist sect said. It's completely opposite to the path of our Tao sect." Fairy Xing Yu said disdainfully, "Try not to change your physical body. I'm afraid you can't even ascend to the immortal world." Of course, Xiao Hua was not here to discuss cultivation with Fairy Xing Yu. He smiled and looked at Shu Ji, saying, "Senior, how did you meet the family of Confucian cultivators?" Shu Ji didn't hide anything and told him the whole story. In fact, it was similar to what Xiao Hua had thought. While Xiao Hua was cleaning up the Yi Qiong heavenly residence, Shu Ji and Fairy Xing Yu had gone to investigate the exit of the spatial fragment. At the same time, they had also investigated the whereabouts of the flying crane immortal beast. Because their strength was greatly reduced, they were very careful and did not dare to follow the flying crane immortal beast too obviously. Moreover, Fairy Xing Yu could not use her star shuttle and had to rely on other secret techniques to find the meteor belt. Therefore, they spent a lot of time in the spatial fragment. Of course, because the exit of the spatial fragment was blocked by the restriction of the Yeqiong heavenly mansion, Fairy Xing Yu's efforts were destined to be fruitless. However, right when they were feeling dejected, they noticed to their shock that there were numerous flying crane immortal beasts residing in a valley that was extremely far away from the Yeqiong heavenly mansion. There were so many that Shu Ji did not dare to investigate carefully. He immediately wanted to take Fairy Xing Yu back to the heavenly abode. The two of them were rather secretive, and the flying crane immortal beast did not discover them. However, the two of them had only flown for 100 kilometers when the valley became lively again. Shu Ji released his extended thought and was surprised to find that the disciples of the four great clans and some other Confucian clans had actually bumped into the flying crane immortal beast's warning area. The two of them wanted to go back and save them, but they saw that there were too many disciples of the Confucian clans. It was not something they could save, so the two of them were ready to give up. At this time, the disciples of the Dongfang family actually took out their immortal imperial equipment. The immortal imperial equipment of the heavenly court was somewhat different from the immortal world's immortal equipment. The true chi of the hidden immortal continent could barely be used. Moreover, the immortal imperial equipment could also be used in the immortal world fragment. Seeing this, Shuji and Fairy Xingyu naturally had to go back and save them. However, even if the two of them rescued many disciples of the Confucian clans and used their immortal imperial equipment to escape from the valley where the flying crane immortal beast was, they had successfully lured thousands of flying crane immortal beasts out. In the absence of an exit, Shuji had no other place to escape. He could only rush back to the Yecheong heavenly mansion and bring Xiao Hua along. Naturally, they did not expect that they would meet Xiao Hua, the immortal Xiao Hua, who was good at creating miracles. Before they could see the shadow of the Yecheong heavenly mansion, the entire immortal world fragment shook. Then, a strong restriction fluctuation rushed out from the heavenly mansion. Of course, Shuji and Fairy Xingyu knew that there was a change in the Yecheong heavenly mansion. They were overjoyed. As long as the restriction of the heavenly mansion was triggered, they could hide in the heavenly mansion. Naturally, they would not be afraid of the flying crane immortal beast's attack. Unfortunately, their joy was that they were too close to leaving the heavenly mansion. When they saw the heavenly mansion, the shadow of the starry sky, and the meteor belt, they knew that the door of life had been opened for them. Unfortunately, in order to save the disciples of the Confucian clans, Shuji and Fairy Xingyu had used too much immortal spirit qi. They could not rely on their physical bodies to absorb immortal spirit qi from the space fragment. When they saw hope, they were already at the end of their rope. At that time, even if Shuji did not go down to save Xiao Hua, he would definitely not be able to hold on until he used the immortal imperial equipment to fly into the meteor belt. Fortunately, Shuji sacrificed his physical body to bring Xiao Hua onto the flying ship. Xiao Hua, who was good at creating miracles, naturally brought the immortal imperial equipment to the flower realm. Sigh, it's too dangerous. Xiao Hua sighed. He knew that this fragment of the immortal world was different from the ruins. Even if he did not hide his cultivation base and used the forbidden power of the immortal world as a soul cultivator and sent out his clones, he was afraid that he would not be a match for the flying crane immortal beast. Of course, Reverend Yun's Pangu axe could be effective. Unfortunately, Yun only had the strength of one axe. Not to mention that he had not fully recovered, Reverend Yun could not resist thousands of flying crane immortal beasts. Shuji heard and said faintly, "The flying crane immortal beast is a famous ferocious beast in the immortal world. Only a vitality-gathering immortal can defeat it." Speaking of vitality-gathering immortal, Shuji realized that he had let the cat out of the bag. He hurriedly covered it up and said, "Even if there were 10 of you at the Mahayana realm, you would not be a match for thousands of flying crane immortal beast." Yes, I know. Xiao Hua nodded and said with a smile, "I just feel a little guilty that I did not do anything." "Didn't you kill a flying crane immortal beast in the heavens abode?" Fairy Xingyu said with a smile, "Could it be that you're still hiding your strength?" "Well, I do have some." Xiao Hua could not bear to see Shuji like this and confessed. Unexpectedly, Shuji interrupted Xiao Hua and said, "That's because I don't allow you to use it. You don't have to blame yourself. All right." Seeing this, Fairy Xingyu straightened up and stretched. She said with a smile, "If you don't want me to say it, then I won't say it. However, this trip to the Star Moon Palace is really unfavorable. We haven't even flown out of the meteor belt and we've already encountered so many dangers. I think it's a good thing." Shuji said, "In the future, if we don't come to the Star Moon Palace, the disciples of the 3 continents will also have scruples and not dare to come in casually. Moreover, if we don't pass through the space fragments of the immortal realm, how can we come to the flower realm? The first time we entered the Star Moon Palace, we were lucky enough to enter the flower realm. The last time we entered the Star Moon Palace, we entered the flower realm again. This kind of opportunity is really rare." Fairy Xingyu smiled sweetly and did not say much. At this time, silence spoke louder than word. Seeing that the rain was gradually getting lighter, Xiao Hua pointed at the meteor belt and asked, "Fairy, where should we go now?" "I don't know either. I'll follow your arrangements." Fairy Xingyu said lazily, The meteor belt is changing. The last time we went out of the flower realm, we fell into a pillar-shaped space fragment. This time, there is no pillar-shaped space fragment in this meteor belt. How would I know where to go? You can see the turbulence in the realm, and we have the immortal imperial equipment under us. Everything is ready, so I don't have to worry. All right. Xiao Hua nodded. He forced himself to open the delusion breaker eye for a moment, then pointed at the curved-like space fragment and said, "Then we'll fly to that space fragment." Then, Xiao Hua sent a voice transmission to Dongfang Yushan and the other disciples of the Confucian aristocratic family to return to the flying boat. He did not discuss with them and activated the flying boat again. At this time, the rain in the flower realm suddenly stopped and the clouds dispersed. Inexplicable light sprinkled down again, and the broken flower branches tenaciously stretched out again. Little bits of colorful light once again emerged from the ground. In the colorful light, hundreds of millions of flower buds protruded out. Presumably, it would not be long before the entire flower realm would be a world of flowers again. However, Xiao Hua did not have time to take another look at this splendid new world. He had already activated the flying boat and left this world that was one of the few worlds that Xiao Guo had not plundered. The beautiful scenery of the past few hours had turned into a permanent memory in his heart. Perhaps, he would come again at some point in time. However, he probably would not be alone to admire the scenery. He would probably bring along a confidant to spend such a beautiful time with him. The curved-like space fragment looked very close, but after activating the flying boat, they actually flew for more than an hour before arriving. After rushing into the halo of the space fragment, what hung above Xiao Hua and the others was a barren continent. There were some strange beasts on this continent, as well as some innate restrictions. Xiao Hua even sensed a familiar primordial wave on this continent. Needless to say, this continent was a lost corner of the primordial world. Of course, this primordial world was only a fragment and could not be compared to the previous Divine Land ruins. The strange beasts inside were only about the 5th grade origin energy. Xiao Hua did not need to do anything. As long as some disciples of the 4 aristocratic families acted, they could drive these strange beasts away. On the primordial world fragment, Xiao Hua's divine telekinesis was also useful. Therefore, it was not too troublesome for Xiao Hua to find the exit of the space fragment. Moreover, when he faced the meteor belt again, Xiao Hua was already more cautious. The first immortal world fragment to enter was a hexagonal plane fragment. Then, the flower boundary was a triangular 3-dimensional fragment. Now, the primordial world fragment they were in was a curve. Therefore, Xiao Hua already had a feeling that whether the interface's level was high or not was reflected in the shape of the fragment. Perhaps, the higher the level of the interface, the simpler the fragment's shape would be. On the other hand, the lower the level of the interface, the more complicated the fragment's shape would be. Therefore, when Xiao Hua was selecting a space fragment, he intentionally looked for 3-dimensional fragments. Even if there were no safe 3-dimensional fragments, he would rather look for simple linear fragments. If there were no 3-dimensional fragments, Xiao Hua might as well wait. In any case, Xiao Hua did not want to go to a space like the immortal world fragment again. Chapter 45:30. Sure enough, Xiao Hua deliberately chose a space fragment that was very complicated and almost shapeless. It was like a cotton cloud. When he got inside, there were no flowers or plants in the space, let alone strange beasts. There were only mountains, seawater, and a strange climate. Xiao Hua drove the flying boat to fly in this space. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, it was struck by lightning 10 times, encountered hailstones, heavy rain 7 times, and snow 6 times. Of course, such a bad climate was just a simple test for cultivators. It could not stop Xiao Hua and the others from going further and further in the meteor belt. The situation after that was needless to say. Under Xiao Hua's leadership, the flying boat passed through more than a dozen space fragments in succession. Xu Ji and Fairy Xingyu were surprised, and even the disciples of the Confucian families were amazed. This was because these fragments were either filled with seawater, vast wilderness, continuous mountains, lost human tribe domains, dilapidated Buddhist temples, or barbarian continents where demonic beasts roamed. There were even 2 inexplicable voids. These voids did not have the transmission channel that Fairy Xingyu had mentioned. They were completely composed of thunder, lightning, and clouds. There was no land, no sea, no humans, and no beasts. However, it was also strange. The dozens of spaces that Xiao Hua passed through were not particularly dangerous. Along the way, they were quite free. However, when the flying boat rushed into a space covered with green vines again, Fairy Xingyu could not help but say, "Spiritual Master Xiao, are you here to play in the meteor belt? Or do you want to pass through the meteor belt? If you want to play here, I'll let the female disciples of the Confucian families play with you, okay? When you're done playing, how about you take us out of this meteor belt?" "Elder sister." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and said, "Do you think I'm playing? Don't you think I'm racking my brains to find a way out?" "I don't see it." Fairy Xingyu replied, "I just see you flying around comfortably. Back then, when I took the disciples of the Star-Picking Tower into the Star Moon Palace, we only passed through 4 or 5 space fragments to reach the other side of the meteor belt. Look at you, there are more than a dozen space fragments, but you haven't seen the edge of the meteor belt. And what do you want me to say about you? I've passed through the meteor belt many times. Apart from the flower realm, I've seen more than 10 spatial fragments that you've passed through. Why haven't I seen any of these spatial fragments before? Big sister, there are millions of spatial fragments in this meteor belt. There are also millions of paths leading to the other side of the meteor belt. Does the path that I choose have to be the one that you have walked on?" Xiao Hua pressed down on the flying boat and stopped in midair. He turned around and smiled. "Don't you think that the path this junior has chosen is very safe? You still have the nerve to say it's safe." When it came to safety, Fairy Xingyu laughed and retorted, "I never thought that I would almost die in the meteor belt. Then, there's nothing I can do." Xiao Hua shrugged his shoulders. He raised his head and looked at the green vines that covered the sky and said, "Why don't you drive the flying boat and pass through the meteor belt?" "Xingyu." Shuji frowned and said, "Don't use people you don't suspect. Now that Xiao Hua is driving the airboat, let him make his own decision." "Shuji." Fairy Xingyu raised her eyebrows and said, "Take a look. Where did he drive the flying boat to? This is probably a fragment of the 10,000 demon realm. This is a space that we have never seen before, right? If we let him fly like this, how long will it take for us to pass through the meteor belt?" "Well, presumably your injury has been controlled." Shuji nodded. "If possible, you can drive the flying boat." "I won't drive the flying boat." Fairy Xingyu pouted, "Let Xiao Hua drive the flying boat. When we reach the exit of the space, I will choose the spatial fragment." "I see." Shuji nodded and looked at Xiao Hua. "Xiao Hua, what do you think?" Xiao Hua's mind did not seem to be in the conversation between the two. At this time, when he heard Shuji's words, he came back to his senses and said, "Of course. However, this junior wants to stay in this space for a while. If possible, let Dongfang Yushan and the others drive the flying boat first. Senior can guide them to the exit of the spatial fragment and wait for this junior there for a while." "What's the matter?" Shuji was a little puzzled and looked around and asked. Xiao Hua smiled and looked at the disciples of the Confucian family in the distance who did not dare to approach. He whispered, "Junior still wants to return to the Dawn Rain continent. Junior knows that the 10,000 demon realm has a space vein and also the Dawn Rain continent. If the 3 continents also have space veins that lead to the 10,000 demon realm, then can't Junior return to the Dawn Rain continent through the 10,000 demon realm? Therefore, Junior wants to see what the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm looks like first." "Who told you that the 3 continents have space veins that lead to the 10,000 demon realm?" Fairy Xingyu sneered. "How come I don't know about this?" "Xingyu," Shuji said, "you and I should understand the feeling of returning home. Even if the 3 continents have no space channel that leads to the 10,000 demon realm, this is still Xiao Hua's hope. If he can find something in the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm, wouldn't that be better? I'll listen to you." Fairy Xingyu impatiently turned to Dongfang Yushan and said, "You and the others drive the flying boat first and fly over there." "Yes, Junior understands." Dongfang Yushan and the others heard this and hurriedly flew over. Although they didn't know what was going on, they still drove the flying boat. Junior will be back soon. Xiao Hua nodded at Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyue. His figure flickered and disappeared into the green vines in a moment. Oh! Seeing a few wisps of greenwood light flashing above the flying boat, Fairy Xingyue was a little surprised. Xiao Hua actually knows the wood escape technique? Yes, and he seems to be very proficient in it. Shu Ji was also a little surprised, but his tone was more of admiration. Let's go. Fairy Xingyue urged Dongfang Yushan and the others to drive the flying boat away, while Xiao Hua's figure appeared in another layer of green vines in the distance. This was a place full of green vines. There were thick vines between heaven and earth. These vines were either covered with fine hair or sharp thorns. Of course, there were more vines that were born with some strange runes. The vines floated in the air, forming clouds. The original ground was also covered with vines. There were also many spiritual grasses among the green vines on the ground. These spiritual grasses looked a little different from those in the 3 continents and the Dawn Rain continent. Not only were they much thicker, but there were also some strange veins on the surface of the spiritual grasses. Before Xiao Hua appeared, there was a rustling sound in the whole world of green vines, as if the wind had blown past. However, after Xiao Hua appeared, the rustling sound immediately disappeared. Although Xiao Hua heard the sound of the wind, the surrounding space was quiet. Xiao Hua smiled slightly. His figure flickered and disappeared again. After the time it took to drink half a cup of tea, the originally quiet space was once again filled with rustling sounds. Furthermore, between the vines, the spirit trees, and the spirit grasses, there were some green balls of light that were faintly swaying. Swoosh! There was a ripple in the space, and Xiao Hua's figure appeared again. However, the green shadows floating among the green vines and plants disappeared instantly and returned to their original state. Hee hee! Xiao Hua smiled slightly and did not stay here. His figure slowly flew and shuttled between the green vines. At this time, he understood that the so-called 10,000 demon realm was somewhat different from the 1,000 demon sacred realm. Although they both had the word demon, the demons in the 1,000 demon sacred realm were demons with flesh and blood, which was the demon race that corresponded to the human race. The demons in the 10,000 demon realm, other than the demon race in the 1,000 demon sacred realm, there were also grass demons, water demons, and mountain demons. In other words, anything that could become a spirit in the world was a demon in the 10,000 demon realm. After flying for an entire meal's worth of time, Xiao Hua stopped again. At this time, there were no longer green vines between the heaven and earth. Instead, there were some huge trees standing in great numbers. There was some light fog floating between these huge trees, and some indescribable light and shadow were faintly discernible in the light fog. There were even some obscure sounds coming from this light fog. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and took out the Kunlun mirror. As the light vibrated, Xiao Gua flew out from the Shenhua continent. Master! When Xiao Gua saw Xiao Hua, her small mouth flattened and cried out. She choked and said, "This little one is useless, this little one is ashamed to face Master." Ah! What's wrong? Xiao Hua was shocked. Xiao Gua, don't worry, tell me slowly. Master, I can't grow the spirit grass that you asked me to bring home. Xiao Gua wiped her tears as she recounted the whole story in shame. Xiao Hua wanted to laugh, but when he saw Xiao Gua's extremely serious look, he tried to be serious and said, "Xiao Gua, don't worry, this is not your fault. It's Master who didn't think it through." Is that so? Master, it's not that this little one didn't do it well. Xiao Gua was surprised. The crystal clear tears still hung on her face. Xiao Hua nodded and said, "Of course, those spiritual herbs are not ordinary spiritual herbs. They are the immortal herbs used to refine the golden core you saw last time. He can't plant them on the Shenhua continent. Haha, so it's like this. This little one thought that this little one didn't need them." Xiao Gua's tears turned into laughter. Her curved eyes were filled with tears. She was extremely cute. Xiao Hua lovingly wiped away the tears in the corner of Xiao Gua's eyes and said, "Don't worry about those immortal herbs, Master has more important things to give you." "Okay, Master, please tell me." Xiao Guo puffed out her small chest and said, "This little one will definitely complete it. You can definitely do this." Xiao Hua smiled, but suddenly he thought of another thing and asked, "What about that Ganoderma? Master hasn't seen it for a long time." Chapter 45-31. Xiao Hua had snatched the Ganoderma horse from Yun Gui Chong in the sword tomb back then. The Ganoderma horse had turned into a spirit herb as soon as it entered the space, but after the yin and yang split in Xiao Hua's space, the Ganoderma horse had regained its spirit body. At the same time, Xiao Guo was also born in the space, becoming the first plant spirit body to take form in Xiao Hua's space. After Xiao Guo, no more plant spirits were born in Xiao Hua's space. It was as if all the Zhongxius were gathered in Xiao Guo's body. Because of Xiao Guo, who was self-taught in the art of refining pills, Xiao Hua almost didn't pay attention to the Ganoderma horse. Xiao Guo had appeared on the Ganoderma horse earlier, but when Xiao Guo came out alone, Xiao Hua had completely forgotten about the Ganoderma horse. At that moment, Xiao Hua had some plans in his heart, and only then did he remember the Ganoderma horse he had in the past. "I'll let Master know," Xiao Guo said in all seriousness. "I used to play with the Ganoderma horse, but later I had to refine pills and share Master's worries, so I didn't have time to play with him. I saw the Ganoderma horse play very well with Little Silver a while ago." Little Silver? Xiao Hua couldn't help smiling bitterly again, and the image of a chubby spirit mouse appeared in his mind. Xiao Hua's experience in the heavenly prison had left him without any distractions, and he had also left Little Silver in the cold on Shenhua continent. It seems that Little Silver's mother has come back recently, so the Ganoderma horse should be with them, Xiao Guo said like a little adult again. "Haha, if that's the case, then that's good. You all can go and help Master." Xiao Hua couldn't help laughing when he heard this. He waved his hand to shake the Kunlun mirror, and brought Little Black, Little Yellow, Little Silver, and the Ganoderma horse out of Shenhua continent. "Daddy." As soon as they were out of the space, Little Yellow bounced and said, "Do you miss the boy? Could it be that there was something that made things difficult for Father again? Don't be afraid, the boy has already grown up. The boy will help you." "Hello, Daddy," Little Black said and stood quietly on the side. "Master." Sure enough, Little Silver was still fat, and his body looked several times bigger than before. He didn't have the spirit mouse's intelligence at all. The Ganoderma seemed a little afraid of Xiao Hua. It had been wagging its tail next to Xiao Hua, but when it saw Xiao Hua, it immediately tucked its tail between its hind legs and opened its mouth, but didn't say anything. "Why don't you guys take a look at where we are first?" Xiao Hua looked at these little things with a smile and asked in a low voice. "Where? Where is this?" Goldie looked around in surprise and asked a few questions. Then, it said regretfully, "There's nothing strange about it. Father, there isn't even a beauty in this place." "Why did you come here?" Sweat. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. He didn't know if he should reprimand Goldie. This place seems to be different from the Thousand Demons' sacred realm. Blackie looked around and said with some doubt, "However, there are actually quite a few spiritual items here." Little Silver's little eyes looked around, and a lazy expression appeared on his face. "Master." Xiao Guo was pleasantly surprised. This little one seems to sense a very familiar aura. There seem to be many companions who are similar to this little one. Xiao Hua smiled like an old fox. "Do you think it's better for these little friends to fend for themselves here? Or to cultivate on Shenhua continent like you and learn alchemy? Of course it's better for them to stay on Shenhua continent." Xiao Guo answered without hesitation, to be able to do something for the master, to be able to make a difference, and not waste one's life, this is the greatest happiness. To fend for themselves in this place, it's simply a waste of time. Good. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, "Master's task for you is that you must think of a way to help more little friends like you, so that they can pull themselves together from this waste of time and become useful spirit." "Really?" Hearing Xiao Hua's words, Xiao Guo's face glowed with a holy light, and a heavy sense of mission made even his voice a little low. "Of course." Xiao Hua nodded. "I'll leave the task of saving the fallen spirits on this land to you. Don't worry, Master. This little one will definitely complete this task." From now on, they must turn over a new leaf and work hard. Saying this, Xiao Guo's figure flashed as he was about to fly away. Xiao Hua hurriedly called out, "Let Jima follow you. Ride him over there." "Okay." Xiao Guo was even more grateful as he rode Jima away. "Daddy." Goldie smiled and said, "Could it be that you've taken a fancy to some big sister? You're too embarrassed to say it, so let boy do it. Go." Xiao Hua glared at Goldie and said, "Go and find as many spirits as possible for Daddy. Don't you think Shenhua continent is too cold?" That's right. Goldie's eyes lit up. "That's right. Big sister Dai watches Yuanya cultivate every day and doesn't have time to talk to boy at all. If you can find some spirits to talk to, millimeter, spirits with some lines, that would be even better. Boy will go now." Saying this, without waiting for Xiao Hua to say anything else, Goldie slipped away like a wisp of smoke. "Boy, go and take a look too." Little Black was always half a beat slower, and only now did he say this unhurriedly as he flew over. Seeing that all the little things had gone and he was the only one left, Little Silver was a little flustered and made a squeaking sound. Xiao Hua waved his hand and instructed, "You go too, and take a look to see if there's anything good." "Yes, Master." Little Silver was overjoyed, and with a flash of silver light, he disappeared in a moment. "Ha ha!" Xiao Hua laughed heartily. He could almost see a bustling scene of a group of plant spirits like Xiao Guo refining pills in Shenhua continent one after another, and piles of pills were being refined endlessly. Xiao Hua smiled, sat down cross-legged, and began to meditate in meditation. He knew that this was a place where spirits were everywhere. If he released his divine sense or pressure, it would disturb the spirits and have a bad impact on his plan. Seeing that 2 hours had passed and Xiao Guo and the others still hadn't returned, Xiao Hua couldn't help but frown. He was afraid that Fairy Xingyu would get impatient and release her divine sense or come to look for him personally. It was also here that some light and shadows flashed in the distance. Xiao Hua hurriedly stood up and was about to send a telepathic message, but when he saw the situation in front of him clearly, he couldn't help but be a little stunned. Admittedly, Xiao Hua could think of using the advantage of Xiao Guo's spirit body to trick those spirit bodies of plants, but he still underestimated Xiao Guo's persuasive power and charisma. He saw that under the green vines in the distance, rays of light and shadow were floating over like water. In front of them, Xiao Guo was riding on the Ganoderma horse, gesturing and saying something to several spirit bodies. Of course, these spirits weren't human, but plants and trees. Seeing Xiao Hua, Xiao Guo hurriedly jumped down from the Ganoderma horse and flew in front of Xiao Hua to salute respectfully. "Master, this little one was fortunate enough to not disappoint you. These are the 10 herbaceous tribes here. They know that Master is kind-hearted and are willing to serve Master." 10 herbaceous tribes. Xiao Hua recovered from his surprise and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid there are more than 10,000 spirits." "I'll let Master know," Xiao Guo said proudly. Of the 10 herbaceous tribes, only 6 tribes have tribe leaders, and each tribe has about 13,000 spirit bodies like this little one. The 10 herbaceous tribes have a total of 150,000 spirit bodies. This many. Xiao Hua looked at the light and shadows, and couldn't help but understand. Herbaceous spirit bodies were very thin, and could be the size of a thumb or as thick as a blade of grass. One light and shadow could have more than 10 spirit bodies, so 150,000 spirit bodies really wasn't a lot. "Yes, Master." Xiao Guo nodded. "If Master is willing, this little one will teach them the art of alchemy one by one." "Of course." Xiao Hua smiled. "Are they all willing to come to Shenhua continent?" "Of course," Xiao Guo answered. "The spiritual qi of heaven and earth here is already somewhat dried up, and herbaceous spirit bodies can't defeat wood spirit bodies, not to mention those beast races." So when this little one said it, they were all very happy. It's just that, they still have 2 requests. "What requests?" Xiao Hua was overjoyed. This was a win-win situation, and it was exactly what he wanted to see. The first request is that these 6 tribe leaders want to go and see the situation of our Shenhua continent. Xiao Guo smiled and pointed at the 6 slightly larger spirit bodies. When the 6 spirit bodies saw that Xiao Hua had seen them, They immediately lowered their heads respectfully and placed their hands on their foreheads that were like stalks of grass. No problem. Xiao Hua smiled and took out the Kunlun mirror, and said, Master can send them in at any time. What's the second request? The second request is that Master can also turn them into a human form like this little one, Xiao Gua said proudly. They are very envious of this little one's appearance. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, and said, this shouldn't be a problem. However, if they want to turn into a human form, they need to cultivate. Master can't help just because you want to. Only when they cultivate to the same level as you, then they can transform. Yes, this little one understands. Xiao Gua replied and flew over to communicate with the 6 spirit bodies. Sure enough, when the 6 spirit bodies nodded, they once again transformed into a human form with a smile. Master, bring them in. Xiao Gua turned her head and said to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua urged the Kunlun mirror to bring Xiao Gua and the 6 spirit bodies into the space. The Kunlun mirror flashed, scaring the spirit bodies into fleeing like water. Xiao Hua didn't pay attention to these spirit bodies. His mind entered the space, and turned into a jade archive. Xiao Hua stood in midair. It was a bit strange. The 6 spirit bodies that followed Xiao Gua into the space were actually 6 vague human forms on Shenhua continent. They were much clearer and stronger than when they were in the space fragment. The 6 spirit bodies seemed to have noticed this, and they whispered something to each other. After a while, the 6 spirit bodies looked at the spirit fields again, and respectfully said something to Xiao Gua. The Jade Archive Xiao Hua saw that the matter was more or less settled, and sent them out of the space. The 6 tribe leaders fell into the space fragment, and the dim light and shadows returned. They didn't wait for Xiao Gua to say anything, and floated into the scattered light and shadows. The light and shadows began to flicker, and in just a moment, a pair of light and shadows under the lead of the tribe leaders floated in front of Xiao Hua. Chapter 45-32. Master. Little Fruit smiled and said, you can take them into your home first, and then I'll take you to take their original bodies as well. Okay. Xiao Hua shook the Kunlun mirror, and his mind swept through these light shadows. Although there were more than 10,000 spiritual bodies, they did not consume much spiritual power, and were taken into Shenhua continent in a moment. Soon after, the rest of the 9 plant races were also sucked into the space. Xiao Hua was once again led by Xiao Gua and Ji Ma to a forest of giant trees. There were a lot of spirit grasses in this forest, but they didn't have any luster and looked listless. Presumably, without their spirit bodies, these spirit grasses had lost their essence. After Xiao Hua took a look, the bodies of the 10 spiritual herbs on the 100 mu of land were also taken into the space. However, after taking these spiritual herbs, Xiao Hua looked at the other spiritual herbs on the ground, and then looked at the 100 mu of empty space, and he fell into deep thought. Compared to the entire space fragment, the spiritual bodies that lived on the 100 mu of land were really a drop in the ocean. In other words, in this space fragment, the so-called spiritual bodies of herbs and wood were innumerable, and these spiritual bodies consumed a lot of heaven and earth spirit chi in this space fragment. If this space fragment was in the 10,000 demon realm, it would be fine, but this fragment was in the meteor belt. Although there were realm storms in the meteor belt, there would be replenishment of heaven and earth spirit chi, but it was still limited. The reason why the space fragment in the immortal realm that Xiao Hua first set foot in was torn apart was because the space exit had been suppressed for a long time, and the expansion was unstoppable. On the other hand, it had something to do with the lack of immortal chi. Now, the space fragment in the 10,000 demon realm was showing signs of heaven and earth spirit chi drying up. If these spiritual bodies did not have other opportunities, they would disappear along with the heaven and earth spirit chi. Instead of letting these spiritual bodies disappear, it was better to let them move to Shenhua continent. At that thought, Xiao Hua transformed back into a jade archive and landed on the Shenhua continent. At that moment, the 150,000 spirit bodies were excitedly staying in their main bodies, desperately absorbing the abundant heaven and earth spirit light that was of a higher grade than the heaven and earth spirit energy. All of them had long transformed into human forms. Jade Archive Xiao Hua used his divine ability to imprint his will into the minds of these spirit bodies. These spirit bodies went crazy and were as excited as Xiao Guo. After being sent out of the space by Jade Archive Xiao Hua, they went towards the spatial fragment. Master. Looking at the many spirits frantically rushing away, even Xiao Guo was stupefied. He calmed himself down, and looking up at Xiao Hua with extreme worship, he said, "You're really amazing." This lowly one had to spend a lot of effort before they finally allowed this lowly one to see their clan leader. Only when this lowly one's mouth was parched did those clan leaders agree to come and take a look. Master only said a few words and it made them so crazy. "This little one really admires you. Hee hee." Xiao Hua laughed. He was really proud in his heart. He had done many things like plundering, but this was the first time he had done something like tricking a spirit body. He didn't expect Xiao Guo to be so effective. And when he acted, it was even scarier. "Father, father." At this moment, a slightly panicked voice came from afar. In mid-air, Xiao Huang's figure was flying over like the wind. Behind him, Xiao Hei was following closely. The two little ones' faces were somewhat nervous. Looking behind the two little ones, an earthen yellow spirit body that was several hundred feet in size was chasing after them. This spirit body was like a mountain. It didn't have any hands or feet. It flew in mid-air like a rolling ball. The air around the spirit body surged, setting off a series of whirlwinds. These whirlwinds were like raging waves that pounced on Xiao Huang. The earthen yellow spirit body emitted a very strange aura. It was very dignified, but it didn't have enough power. When it landed on Xiao Hua, it didn't attract too much attention. Xiao Hua frowned. His divine sense condensed like a hammer. Hong! It smashed on top of the earthen yellow spirit body. The earthen yellow spirit body spun in the air and actually stopped there. A burst of obscure fluctuations came over. These fluctuations were mixed with some vibrating sounds like pines. "Master." Hearing this, Xiao Guo hurriedly said, "This spirit body asked who Master was and why you blocked it." At this moment, Xiao Huang had already flown to Xiao Hua's side. He looked very courageous. He turned his head and his big tail proudly wagged behind him. He shouted, come over if you have the ability." Xiao Hua frowned and said, "Xiao Huang, what's going on?" Xiao Huang didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly replied, "Father." The boy obeyed orders and went to look for the spirit body in this space. In this space, there were spirit bodies everywhere. However, they were all ordinary. The boy felt that these spirit bodies might not be of interest to his father, so he went to look for them in the distance. When the boy saw this big guy, he felt that he was more suitable to be his father's subordinate, so he told him about it. In the end, this guy didn't want to. If he didn't want to, then he didn't want to. The boy also didn't force him. When he was about to leave, the boy happened to see another spirit body with a good figure. "Speaking of this spirit body, Father, Yuanya is really too boring. How can he be worthy of Sister Daya?" The boy thought that if he brought this spirit body home, he would first break them up. Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hurriedly interrupted Xiao Guo's endless words and asked, "Get to the point. Why did this spirit body want to kill you?" The boy also doesn't know. Xiao Huang was also puzzled. When the boy saw this spirit body, he used his silver tongue and talked about our family's beauty, Yuanya's strength, and his outstanding strength. The boy didn't say anything clearly. He just told the spirit body that he would find her a good husband. This big guy flew into a rage and wanted to kill the boy without saying anything. Xiao Hua ignored Xiao Huang and turned to ask Xiao Hei, "Is Xiao Huang telling the truth?" "Yes, father." Xiao Hei replied concisely. Xiao Hua nodded. He looked up at the spirit body and asked again, "What about that so-called good figure spirit body?" "I don't know. He shouldn't be here." Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, "That spirit body is very shy, Xiao Huang." Xiao Hua nodded and ordered, "Go, apologize to this spirit body. Say that you disturbed him and that it was a misunderstanding." "Why?" Xiao Huang raised his little face and said stubbornly, "How did I provoke him? I didn't touch a single hair on his body. I just talked to him, talked to another spirit body, and he wanted to kill me. He should apologize to me. Also, Father, You are a Mahayana cultivator, a supreme existence in the 3 continents. Boy apologizing to him will make father lose face. Xiao Hua was somewhat displeased. He snorted and said, Xiao Huang, father doesn't know what you did wrong. But don't forget, you were the one who spoke to him first. If you didn't speak, why would he want to kill you? How about this, Xiao Huang, think about it carefully. If you think you're not wrong, father will kill this spirit body right now. I definitely won't let him go back alive. What do you think? As long as you pat your chest and say that you're not wrong. Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, Father, you don't have to kill him, right? You just have to drive him away. Yes. Xiao Hua said resolutely, as long as you dare to pat your chest and say that you're not wrong, this. Xiao Huang hesitated. He raised his little paw and didn't lower it. In the end, he said, Father, this may be a misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? Xiao Hua asked. Boy didn't speak to that spirit body, and this big guy didn't have a particularly extreme reaction. It's just that the boy spoke too much, and this big guy became angry. Although Xiao Huang was a chatterbox, his thoughts were quite meticulous. He was still able to put himself in the other's shoes. Then go and apologize. Xiao Hua nodded. Although father needs face, father disdains this kind of meaningless face. Furthermore, father doesn't want you to become a hedonistic son of a rich family who bullies others. Yes, father. Goldie was quick to correct his mistake. He nodded and walked to a spot not far away. He faced the spiritual body and sang, Big brother, I was rash earlier. If there's any trouble, please forgive me. As the saying goes, mountains don't move, water moves, and water doesn't move, demons move. We're all demons, and we see each other all the time. The mountains don't change, and the water flows forever. Roar! Without waiting for Xiao Huang to finish speaking, the mountain-like spirit body roared loudly. A fist-like thing flew out from the spirit body, streaking across the sky, and was about to smash Xiao Huang's body. Xiao Huang's figure flashed, and he was about to dodge. However, he thought of Xiao Hua's words, and his figure once again stood in the distance, not daring to move. Chimpage. Xiao Hua sneered. He grabbed again, and a huge golden hand that was several hundred zhong in size appeared out of thin air. Under the huge hand, not to mention the mountain-like spirit body that was several hundred zhong in size, even the space of several thousand zhong in size was in prison. Immediately, that huge hand slightly grabbed again. The mountain-like spirit body trembled and rapidly shrank. In a moment, it actually shrank to several hundred zhong in size. Woo-woo. Right at this moment, from the place where the mountain-like spirit body had flown over, another thin and tall spirit body arrived along with the wind. Before it could even fly in front of Xiao Hua, it immediately fell down in midair and babbled something from its mouth that no one knew what it was saying. Master! Xiao Gua hurriedly shouted. This spirit body said that this concubine is willing to serve this young master. Master, please spare her husband. Whose husband? Xiao Huang looked at this thin and tall spirit body in disbelief. He then looked at the spirit body that was several hundred zhong in size and said in shock, This difference, isn't it too big? Xiao Huang. Xiao Hua said coldly, Did you see? Father. Xiao Huang hurriedly replied, It's all this boy's fault. Boy didn't expect it to be like this. Xiao Gua. Xiao Hua nodded, explained to this spirit body, Yes. Xiao Gua hurriedly flew over and helped the thin and tall spirit body up. After a few words, the spirit body's head transformed into a rather beautiful woman's appearance. She looked at Xiao Hua, then at Xiao Huang, and nodded. Chapter 45-33. After hearing this, Xiao Gua respectfully says to Xiao Hua, Master, she said she understood. Earlier little Huang spoke too fast so she didn't understand. I reckon her husband also didn't understand. Xiao Hua nods his head. With a wave of his big sleeve, that golden big hand immediately disappears. And that mountain-like spiritual body returns to its original size of several hundred zhong. At this moment, this mountain-like spiritual body doesn't dare to move carelessly. That huge spiritual body slowly rotates in mid-air, no one knows what it is thinking. That slender spiritual body flies to the mountain-like spiritual body's side and mutters a few words. The two spiritual bodies are about to turn around. Woo-woo. A gust of wind sounds. On the ground all around, spiritual bodies rush over like a flood from the space. The first one is the wood spiritual body who volunteered to go around looking for spiritual bodies. Master, Master. Before the group of spiritual bodies even get close, they shout loudly, quickly open the door, we are waiting for you to come back. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua doesn't understand this voice. After Xiao Guo reminds him, Xiao Hua takes out Kunlun mirror. With a wave of his hand, Kunlun mirror transforms into a huge door in midair. Those spiritual bodies who come into contact with the light pillar above this door all disappear. Damn it. Xiao Hua looks at the seemingly endless amount of spiritual bodies among the green vines and huge trees. He unconsciously smiles bitterly. This movement is too big, isn't it? Even if I don't want to attract the attention of the two immortals, I'm afraid I can't do it now. Master. Suddenly, Xiao Guo says again, that spiritual body wants to go to our house to take a look. What is he going to do? Xiao Hua is somewhat impatient. He waves his hand and says, even if he can go in, I'm afraid it won't be easy to take his main body in. That. Xiao Guo says hesitantly, this spiritual body seems to want to send his wife in, but his wife is not willing to leave him. He even scolded his wife. His wife is still crying over there. Ai. Xiao Hua hears and his heart is moved. He sighs and says, who says plants are heartless and mountains are heartless? No matter if it is a mountain or a plant, as long as it has a spirit, it will have feelings. The Tao of heaven allows them to have spirits. How can this Xiao not fulfill their wishes? Xiao Guo, let them in. Yes, Master. Xiao Guo happily agreed. The two spiritual bodies also fell into the Kunlun mirror's light pillar. Xiao Hua's consciousness also followed in. As expected, of the two spirits that entered Shenhua continent, one transformed into an extremely burly man while the other transformed into a lithe woman. The two of them looked at each other with wild joy before looking around and whispering something to each other. The two spirits seemed to be quarreling, and then they hugged each other and cried. In the end, both of them made up their minds. Xiao Hua understood a little. After waiting for a while, Xiao Hua pulled them out of the space. The two spirits hurriedly kowtowed to Xiao Hua and opened their mouths to say something. Xiao Guo said from the side, Master, one of them said that you must let her enter the space, and the other said that if he doesn't enter, she won't enter either. Although Xiao Guo's words didn't distinguish between he and she, Xiao Hua understood. Xiao Hua smiled and said, tell them to go back first. In a while, I will go and see how big this big guy's body is. If it's possible, I will also take him. Okay. Xiao Guo nodded and relayed Xiao Hua's words. The two spirits left in high spirits. You and the others go back first. Xiao Hua's heart stirred. With a sweep of his consciousness, he put Xiao Guo and the others into the space. Hey! Where did little Silver go? Why isn't he back yet? Xiao Hua looked into the distance and was truly bewildered. He thought to himself, he won't be like little Huang and cause a huge mess, right? Hee. Just as Xiao Hua was thinking this, he heard Fairy Xingyu's laughter in the air. I knew it. What can happen to you? Sure enough, you're thinking about the spirits in this space fragment again, but Xiao Hua, don't you think your ambition is a little too big? Xiao Hua smiled and looked at Fairy Xingyu, who had revealed herself in the void. He shrugged and said, Senior, this junior's heart is very small. How can it be too big and too wild? One spirit body to refine one, immortal pill. You have so many spirits, how many immortal pills do you need to refine? You don't know how to refine them now. You have so many spirits, just to refine immortal pills for yourself in the future. Fairy Xingyu looked at Xiao Hua and asked, don't you think what you're doing is going against heaven and earth? Refine immortal pills. Hearing this, Xiao Hua's heart stirred. He thought of the medicinal pill he had refined for Fairy Hongxia back in Million Meng Mountains. That flying shadow pill seemed to have been made with the help of spirit blood. That was just spirit blood, and the flying shadow pill had such a powerful effect. If he used spirit bodies to refine immortal pills, What grade would it be? Senior misunderstands this junior. Xiao Hua smiled and explained the situation. Finally, he said, since the spirit energy of heaven and earth in this space fragment is about to dry up, and this junior's Kunlun mirror needs spirit bodies to expand its spirit energy, why can't this junior take these spirits into the Kunlun mirror? If that's the case, this action of yours will benefit the spirit bodies. Fairy Xingyue seemed to be deep in thought. She did not ask Xiao Hua how he could understand the words of the spirit bodies, nor did she ask what method he had used to coax these spirit bodies into the mirror. Instead, she said, however, do you think you have the Dharma power to control so many spirit bodies in the Kunlun mirror? How would I know if I don't try? Xiao Hua retorted. These spirits are going to die anyway. Don't tell me they'll die there. Humph, you're waiting for them to die before using their bodies, right? Fairy Xingyu looked at Xiao Hua confidently and asked. Xiao Hua shrugged and said, Senior, you can think whatever you want. Anyway, these spirits already believe this junior. What a glib tongue. Fairy Xingyu curled her lips and said, Fairy Baihua was fooled like this back then. This is two different things. Xiao Hua did not know whether to laugh or cry. Forget it. Do whatever you want. Fairy Xingyu said. Release the disciples of Jai Xinglu from the Kunlun mirror. Ah, why? Xiao Hua asked curiously. Isn't there a meteor belt ahead? Isn't it not there yet? At this point, Xiao Hua seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He hurriedly covered his mouth and laughed. Haha, this junior understands. What do you understand? Fairy Xingyu said somewhat angrily. I'm not as despicable as you think. I'm just thinking that after the meteor belt, your Kunlun mirror can no longer be used. You have to send the disciples of Jai Xinglu out from this spatial fragment. I've never thought of letting them touch the spatial fragment of the 10,000 demon realm. Xiao Hua smiled and raised his hand to point at the Kunlun mirror. A beam of light separated and the disciples of Jai Xinglu flew out from it. They all landed in the air. Xiao Hua still said, Elder sister, this junior didn't say anything. This is all your own idea. Spirit bodies. Among the disciples of Jai Xinglu, there were naturally knowledgeable ones. When they saw the tide of spirit bodies pouring into Xiao Hua's space, they could not help but cry out. He, these spirit bodies are not fated to be with you. Xiao Hua said with a smile. There may be some spiritual herbs, spiritual fruits, and other things ahead. You can go ahead and take a look. At this point, Xiao Hua knew that Fairy Xingyu had come here because she was attracted by the tide of spirit bodies. However, her original intention was to let the disciples of Jai Xinglu collect more spiritual herbs in this spatial fragment. Fairy Xingyu glared at Xiao Hua and waved her hand. All of you, follow me. Yes, Palace Master. No one dared to be negligent and all answered respectfully. After the disciples of Jai Xinglu had left, Xiao Hua looked at the spirit bodies that were still pouring in. He was really shocked and thought to himself, damn it, how many spirit bodies are there in this spatial fragment? I've already collected so many, but why can't I see an end to them? The 10 herb clans. How can they be more deceptive than Xiao Guo? After a full hour, the spirit bodies that were pouring in gradually decreased. Xiao Hua did not know how many spirit bodies he had collected. However, he knew very well that in today's Shenhua continent, the number of spirit bodies had long surpassed that of the human clan. It was just that these spirit bodies were confined in a certain area by him, and the human clan on Shenhua continent did not know about it at all. The spirit bodies of the 10,000 demon realm fragment had entered the spatial fragment, but their bodies were still in the spatial fragment. Xiao Hua did not know how the spirit bodies cultivated, and he did not dare to abandon the bodies of these spirit bodies. After waiting for another hour, when all the spirit bodies had entered the spatial fragment, Xiao Hua pointed at the Kunlun mirror again. The Kunlun mirror flew into the air. As Xiao Hua's hands moved, hundreds of thick crystal lights fell into the spatial fragment like thunderbolts. The entire Kunlun mirror began to roar and gradually expanded. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the Kunlun mirror had turned into 100 miles in size. Then, Xiao Hua's figure flashed and landed on the Kunlun mirror. The Kunlun mirror emitted a huge beam of light that shone on the ground and landed between the green vines and the giant trees. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The spiritual herbs and trees that had lost their essence rushed into the Kunlun mirror. Then, Xiao Hua activated the Kunlun mirror to check the entire spatial fragment. This spatial fragment was not big, but it was definitely not small either. It had a radius of millions of miles. Xiao Hua spent several days before he finally managed to absorb the true bodies of those spiritual bodies into his body. During the collection process, Xiao Hua naturally rolled his eyes at Fairy Xingyu. When the disciples of the scholarly cultivator families and Zhai Xinglu saw how powerful Xiao Hua's magic treasure was, they respectfully avoided him, but there were also envious gazes. While collecting the bodies of the spiritual herbs, Xiao Hua naturally paid attention to Little Silver's whereabouts. However, when Xiao Hua collected all the spiritual herbs, he did not see Little Silver. Strange. Xiao Hua was even more puzzled. Did Little Silver encounter some danger? However, I don't seem to have seen any spirit body above 5th grade in this spatial fragment. With Little Silver's strength, how could he be in danger? After collecting the Kunlun mirror, Xiao Hua urged his figure to check on Shuji's injuries. After all, after falling into the spatial fragment, Shuji did not come down from the flying boat. Xiao Hua had a bad feeling in his heart. But at that moment, Xiao Hua suddenly thought of the mountain-like spirit body. Xiao Hua hurriedly asked Little Black where the spirit body was and urged his figure to come to a rare spirit mountain. Chapter 45-35. The spirit mountain had a radius of more than 10 miles and was shaped like a heart. On one side of the heart-shaped spirit mountain, there was a green vine covering it. Seeing Xiao Hua descend, the spirit stone rumbled a few times and the mountain-like spirit body walked out. At the same time, the green vine swayed and shined brightly like starlight. The slender spirit body also walked out from the green vine. Xiao Hua looked at the green vine and then at the spirit mountain. He frowned. There was no problem for him to put the green vine into the space, but it was a little troublesome to collect the spirit stone. It was not that Xiao Hua could not collect the spirit mountain that was more than 10 miles in size, but this spirit mountain was originally a part of the space fragment. Unlike the Tongtian Peak or the 5 elements magnetic force, Xiao Hua did not know where to collect it, let alone how to collect it without destroying the entire space fragment. After all, there were more spirits on the space fragment that were unwilling to enter the space. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and shook the Kunlun mirror, wanting to release Xiao Guo. However, with a flash of light, Xiao Hua changed Xiao Guo to Xiao He. After all, Fairy Xingyu had found Xiao Guo in the Tianfu abode. If she saw Xiao Guo here, she would suspect him for no reason. Xiao He told him about Xiao Hua's misgivings. The two spirits seemed to have already discussed it. Although Qing Man's spirit looked desolate, she couldn't resist the urging of the spirit of Spirited Mountain. She flew to Xiao Hua and bowed. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and said to Xiao He, I don't understand how these spirits cultivate. Ask the spirit of the Spirit Mountain. The spirits of the plants can't leave their bodies for the time being. As the spirit of the mountain stone, can he leave? If he can also enter the Kunlun mirror. Yes, father. Xiao He agreed, then asked the spirit body. Sure enough, the spirit body was trembling. Then, it said a few words to Xiao He. Xiao He didn't say anything to Xiao Hua, so it agreed a few more times. Then, the spirit body suddenly turned into a stone pillar, kneeled in front of Xiao Hua, and muttered something. Haha, get up. Xiao Hua raised his hand and helped the spirit up. He asked Xiao He, what did you say to him? Father. Little Black answered, this spirit body said that he doesn't know how to grow spirit herbs and is afraid that father will dislike him, so he doesn't dare to enter the Kunlun mirror. The boy told him that father is the most broad-minded. He doesn't need him to plant any spiritual herbs. As long as he doesn't separate him from his wife, father will definitely agree. Good. Xiao Hua nodded, your words are father's words. You can go back first. As he spoke, Xiao Hua shook the Kunlun mirror and put Little Black away. He was going to take in the two spiritual bodies. At this time, a cracking sound suddenly came from the bottom of the spiritual mountain. Then, a wave more powerful than a tsunami rushed out from the depths of the spiritual mountain and spread towards the spatial fragment. At the same time, a layer of light that was almost visible to the naked eye swept across the ground faster than the wave. Wherever the light passed, the colors seemed to fade. Everywhere the light passed, faint cracks appeared on the ground. Chirp, 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 chirp. There was a panicked sound in the air, and Little Silver's figure was thrown out like a rock in this wave. Xiao Hua was alarmed and raised his hand to grab it. Boom! A golden palm several li wide sealed off the source of Little Silver's voice. But before Xiao Hua could activate his magic power, an inexplicable rule was born. Boom! Xiao Hua's big hand was shattered. Oh! Xiao Hua was blank. He activated his magic power again and the big hand was born again. Boom! The rule was born again, and Xiao Hua's big hand was shattered again. Not good. Xiao Hua turned pale with fright. He activated his magic power 9 times in a row, and the big hand was shattered 9 times. At that moment, Little Silver's figure was revealed. There was something the size of a fist in his mouth, and his entire body was mottled in the air. His little bright silver tail twitched weakly in the air, and it looked like it had actually been cut into several pieces. Seeing this, how could Xiao Hua not know that Little Silver had gotten into big trouble? With a whoosh, he flew into the space where Little Silver was. But before he could land, a tremendous and unrivaled will of heaven and earth appeared in the air to block Xiao Hua. Layers of distinct black and white spatial ripples appeared in the area several li around Little Silver like fish swimming in water. Xiao Hua was burning with anxiety. He was about to activate his divine ability to rescue Little Silver, but when he saw so many black and white spatial ripples, his heart couldn't help but stir. Space! Xiao Hua then raised his hand and pointed at the Kunlun mirror. Swish! A beam of light fell and covered the space where Little Silver was. Boom, boom, boom. Wherever the beam of light passed, all the spatial ripples disappeared. That unrivaled will of heaven and earth became even more valiant, as if it was resisting space. Rumble! Very strangely, tiny thunderbolts appeared on the edge of the Kunlun mirror's beam of light, and it started to collapse. Xiao Hua's eyes swiveled rapidly. After several breaths, he tried to release his mind and follow the beam of light. Strangely, wherever his mind passed, the thunderbolts disappeared and the beam of light grew brighter and brighter. A space passage gradually appeared around Little Silver. When the beam of light completely enveloped Little Silver, his figure was also revealed. Only then did Xiao Hua see that what Little Silver was holding in his mouth was something that looked like a gallbladder. This thing was covered in hair-thin cracks that went deep into its core. However, from these cracks, thousands of tiny rays of light flickered. These tiny rays of light came from a crystal grain that was almost invisible to the naked eye at the core of the gallbladder. The will of heaven and earth and the indescribable nomological laws came from this crystal grain. It was very clear that the will of heaven and earth and the nomological laws weren't something that the Kunlun mirror's beam of light could resist. But when they came into contact with Xiao Hua's mind, their strong sense of resistance weakened. Master, hurry! Little Silver could finally speak, and he cried out in his heart, "This is a good thing, hurry up and put it away." Xiao Hua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had wanted Little Silver to find some good things, but he hadn't wanted Little Silver to make such a big fuss. Master! Seeing Xiao Hua hesitate, Little Silver urged, "My father said that if a man wants to do something, he should do it big. There's nothing in this space that's worthy of this little one's hand. Only this thing can be seen in this little one's eyes." Hee, okay. Seeing that Little Silver was as greedy as he was and as arrogant as Little Yellow, Xiao Hua smiled and was about to put it away with his mind. But just then, 2 tyrannical thoughts swept over from afar, and Fairy Xingyu cried out in surprise, Is this a spirit gallbladder? This? I've never seen or heard of it before." Shuji's tired voice rang out. After a few breaths, 2 silhouettes with silver light stepped out of the spatial ripples. It was Fairy Xingyu and Shuji. At that moment, Shuji was already able to reveal his human form, but the silver light had fused with the armor from earlier to protect his entire body. His head was still covered by the faint silver light, and his appearance couldn't be seen. This faint silver light gave off boundless majesty. It wasn't just little Silver and the two spirits, but even Xiao Hua felt an indescribable pressure. Senior. Xiao Hua hurriedly asked, "Can you still maintain your physical body?" Millimeter, I should be able to last until we reach the starry sky maze. Shuji nodded in reply, his expression hidden. This spirit-seeking mouse is your spirit pet? Yes, Senior. Xiao Hua said with a smile. When this junior sent the star-picking tower disciples out just now, I also let him out in passing, wanting him to find a treasure for this junior. Who would have thought that he would actually find this thing? I just don't know. What is this spirit gallbladder? Spirit gallbladder, as the name implies, is the gallbladder of the spiritual world. Fairy Xingyu's voice was full of envy. Looking at the fist-sized gallbladder, she explained, it is the foundation of the spirit chi world. The spirit chi world is born from the spirit gallbladder, and the spirit gallbladder also dies when the spirit chi world is annihilated. Xiao Hua, you actually got this thing. I don't know if your luck is good or bad. Oh, what does Senior mean? Xiao Hua seemed to understand something. He looked at Fairy Xingyu with a smile and said, "This junior's luck has always been good." "Of course your luck is good." Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, "We thought this fragment was a corner of the 10,000 demon realm. But I was wrong. This fragment should be a fragment of a world parallel to the 10,000 demon realm, and it definitely isn't the 10,000 demon realm, because the spirit gallbladder of the 10,000 demon realm is in the 10,000 demon realm. It can't be in this fragment. However, your luck doesn't seem to be as good as you think. Although this fragment is the core of a world, this world has collapsed. If it weren't for a coincidence, this space fragment wouldn't exist here. It would have been annihilated long ago. Of course, since the spirit gallbladder has been taken away by you, this space fragment will no longer have spirit chi. The fragment will eventually become fragments and won't exist for long. As for this spirit gallbladder, it is on the verge of annihilation. Even if you get it, it will be meaningless to you. Those spirit bodies can provide spirit chi in your Kunlun Wonderland and maintain it, but this spirit gallbladder is not something that your Kunlun Wonderland can nourish. Xiao Hua frowned and said, "Even if I put this spirit gallbladder back now, it probably won't work, right?" "Of course." Fairy Xingyu nodded. If the spirit gallbladder wasn't about to be annihilated and the core of this world was about to shatter, it would be absolutely impossible for your spirit pet to take the spirit gallbladder out of the core of the fragment. What about the spirit bodies on this space fragment? Xiao Hua asked hurriedly, what will happen to them? Fairy Xingyu glanced at Xiao Hua and asked, "Do you still need to ask?" "Well, this junior understands." Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, "Senior, this spirit body is the spirit of this spirit mountain. Do you have the means to pull this spirit mountain out? This junior can take this spirit mountain into the Kunlun mirror." Chapter 45-36. That's not a problem. Shuji nodded. "I can pull this spirit stone out of the ground. Why do you need this spirit mountain?" Fairy Xingyu waved her hand. When the spirit gall was still around, this spirit mountain was useful to the spirit body. Now that the spirit gall is gone, this spirit mountain is just a shell. You just need to put it in the Kunlun immortal realm, and then find a stone that can be put in somewhere else. Actually, to be honest, this spirit body is a mountain spirit and is more useful than those plant spirits. If you put it in the Kunlun immortal realm, it will be of great use to the Kunlun mirror. Millimeter, this junior understands. Relieved, Xiao Hua then turned to Little Silver and said, "Release this spirit guts and ask this spirit body if it can understand what you're saying." "Yes, my lord." Little Silver obediently released the spirit gall. It flew out of Little Silver's mouth and floated in the air. Layers of dark green and withered yellow intertwined. Amidst the light and shadow, the images of different interfaces appeared one after another, but they disappeared as soon as they fell into the space. Seeing that Xiao Hua didn't say anything, Little Silver released the spirit gall and flew over to whisper in front of the mountain-like spirit body. Fairy Xingyu couldn't help frowning again. She was very surprised by Xiao Hua's elusive methods. After a while, Little Silver replied, "My lord, he doesn't know what you're talking about, but I've already told him." Millimeter. Xiao Hua nodded. "What does he mean?" Xiao Hua nodded slightly and asked again. "Oh, I understand." Little Silver was a little reserved in front of Xiao Hua. He didn't understand what Xiao Hua meant at first, but when Xiao Hua asked, he immediately nodded and whispered a few more words to the mountain-like spirit body. Boom, boom, boom. The mountain-like spirit body kowtowed a few times at Xiao Hua before its huge body rolled away. At the same time, the slender spirit body also hurriedly flew away. Little Silver? Xiao Hua asked curiously. Why did he run away? Didn't you tell him not to put the spirit mountain into the Kunlun mirror? I didn't. Little Silver chuckled and said, I told him that this space is about to be finished. If he wants to live, it's better for him to hide in Daddy's Kunlun mirror. Furthermore, this lowly one also told him that if he had any close neighbors, he should inform them as well. Don't regret it later. Ha ha. Xiao Hua laughed. You're really good, you're as good as your father. Of course. Little Silver hurriedly replied, although Daddy isn't this little one's biological son, this little one grew up with Daddy and called you mother for so many years, how could this little one not do the same to Daddy? Where did the mountain spirit go? Shuji was confused. Senior, you'll know soon enough. Xiao Hua pretended to be mysterious. As expected, in less than half a cup of tea's time, the entire space began to tremble. Hundreds of mountain spirits flew out from the ground. The largest of these mountain spirits were several thousand meters tall, and the smallest were several dozen meters tall. They all flew around the spirit gallbladder and let out a whining sound. Swish, swish, swish. After the mountain spirits, all kinds of spirits actually flew over. They all fell down in front of the familiar fluctuations and aura of the spirit gallbladder. In less than half a cup of tea's time, the entire world was filled with many spirits. These spirits were colorful, but they hadn't solidified yet, and their strength was too shallow. Seeing this, how could Shuji not know what was going to happen? He looked at Xiao Hua, not knowing what to say. Even Fairy Xingyu had a sneer on her face as she reminded Xiao Hua, the Confucian cultivators of the hidden immortal continent have a saying, a man whose heart is not content is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. You've already collected so many spirits, it's enough for your Kunlun wonderland. These spirits are all the spirits of this space. You have to think about it carefully. They might destroy your Kunlun mirror. Xiao Hua replied without hesitation, Senior, this junior knows very well. Although this junior's heart aches for my Kunlun mirror, I don't want the Kunlun wonderland to be occupied by these spirits. However, since these spirits have become spirits, they have a life. If this junior doesn't collect them into the Kunlun mirror, they will die. When this junior thinks that a world bigger than the 3 continents is only so big now, and so many spirits have already perished, this junior's heart aches. If this junior didn't know, it would have been fine. But now that this junior knows that it can save their lives, not to mention the Kunlun mirror, even if this junior risks my own life, I will give it a try. After all, to this junior, it's just a risk, but to them, it's the hope of survival. Hiss. Fairy Xingyu was greatly moved, but Shuji wasn't too surprised. He just looked at the spirits in the sky indifferently and pondered. Xiao Hua. Fairy Xingyu said in a low voice, I can't tell if you're sincere or not. If you're sincere, you're definitely the most loving person in the immortal world. But if you're not sincere, you're the most greedy hypocrite in the world. What if it's half true and half false? Xiao Hua didn't care about what others said and asked with a smile. Fairy Xingyu was stunned. After a moment, she smiled and said, even if it's half true and half false, you can still become a Buddha. Namo Metria Buddha. Xiao Hua smiled slightly, put his palms together, and chanted the name of Buddha. Ah! Fairy Xingyu was slightly stunned. Then, she covered her mouth and laughed. She also put her palms together and chanted the name of Buddha. Namo Amitabha, I'm here to pay my respect. Ha ha ha. Xiao Hua didn't understand at first, but after a moment, he laughed again and asked, Senior, are you a Buddhist, a Taoist, or a Confucian cultivator? I am whatever you are. Fairy Xingyu said, pretending to be profound. Shuji ignored the two of them. He thought for a moment and said seriously, Xiao Hua, it's already good that you have a heart of universal love. However, I also think that you should act according to your ability. How about this? Xingyue and I will help you collect these spirits, and then let the disciples of Zhai Xinglu help you collect the bodies of these spirits. As for the bodies of the mountain rock spirits, it's fine if you don't collect them. After all, the bodies of the mountain rock spirits are illusions in the Kunlun Wonderland. If you really take their bodies in, it will have a great impact on the entire Wonderland. Xiao Hua looked at Shuji. Although he couldn't see his appearance clearly, Xiao Hua could believe that Shuji was warm-hearted. He nodded fiercely and said, Thank you, Senior. This is what I should do. Shuji replied, It's a pity that I haven't activated my fairy artifact, nor do I have a spatial fairy artifact. Otherwise, I would have collected them directly. These are all fresh lives. I was lucky, and so were the two seniors. This is all arranged by the heavens. The way of heaven must be watching our merit. Xiao Hua said emotionally. Merits are the business of the Buddhist sect. It has nothing to do with my Taoist sect. Shuji replied faintly, I just want to live up to my conscience. Senior, it's enough that you have this thought. Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xingyu and asked Shuji, Senior, how should we do it? Shuji also looked at Fairy Xingyu and said, Xingyu, I'm not very familiar with this spiritual gallbladder. How do you think we should deal with it? Fairy Xingyu seemed to have thought about it a long time ago. She said, Xiao Hua, try putting this spiritual gallbladder into the Kunlun mirror first. I can't guarantee that the Kunlun mirror can hold this thing of heaven and earth. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and activated the Kunlun mirror. As the beam of light shone brightly, his mind also rolled up the spiritual gallbladder. Buzz. The spiritual gallbladder slowly moved. At this time, the spiritual gallbladder was different from the one in Little Silver's mouth. Every time the spiritual gallbladder moved an inch, the space collapsed an inch, and the will of heaven and earth moved an inch. As the spiritual gallbladder moved, not only did the light beam of the Kunlun mirror shake, but the Kunlun mirror itself also shook violently. Marks and cracks appeared on the surface of the mirror. Shuji raised his hand and was pulled back by Fairy Xingyu again. She whispered, Shuji, this depends on how well Xiao Hua can control the Kunlun mirror. We can't interfere, Shuji naturally understood, but he was really worried about Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was confident that he could put this spiritual gallbladder into his space. However, in front of these two immortals, he was afraid that he would reveal the flaws of his space. Therefore, he had to carefully activate his mind and look for an opportunity. Seeing that the spiritual gallbladder was getting closer to the Kunlun mirror was getting more and more shattered. It couldn't hold on at all. Xiao Hua simply gritted his teeth and shouted, Keep! The Kunlun mirror shone brightly, and the beam of light fell like a waterfall. The moment the beam of light fell, the spiritual gallbladder suddenly disappeared. It had been taken into Xiao Hua's space. When the spiritual gallbladder entered the space, it didn't fall into the Shenhua continent like the other spiritual bodies. Instead, it floated in the void. Crack. As soon as the spiritual gallbladder settled down, its shell, which was already full of cracks, cracked and shattered. Crystal grains, which were almost invisible to the naked eye, appeared. Then, a powerful will of heaven and earth emerged from these crystal grains and rushed into the void. This will of heaven and earth was even stronger than when the spiritual gallbladder had moved. The void was completely messed up. Layers of tiny whirlpools rushed toward the Shenhua continent and the other spaces with this will of heaven and earth. Boom! It seemed that the distance between this crystal grain and the other spaces was different. However, the will of heaven and earth crashed into all the spaces at the same time. A deafening roar resounded in the void, causing the entire space to tremble. Then, dozens of similar wills of heaven and earth emerged from the various spaces. They quickly smoothed out the whirlpools of space and went back into the crystal grain. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Strange explosive sounds were produced around the crystal grain. Lights of various colors were also produced in the entire void. After a while, all the lights rushed into the crystal grain from all directions. Boom! An even louder explosion was produced from the crystal grain. The space around the crystal grain instantly exploded and expanded wildly. The nearby space, which had not matured, was enveloped by this explosion. That space had just entered the crystal grain. Whoosh! A hurricane appeared around this space. A powerful suction force came out of this space and passed through the hurricane to land on the Shenhua continent. The spiritual bodies and their real bodies that Xiaohua had already taken into the Shenhua continent were all sucked into this space in a flash. As the spiritual bodies entered this space, it became bigger and bigger. It grew until it was tens of millions of miles in size before it slowly stopped. A continent that looked like a spatial fragment was already taking shape. Chapter 45-37. Naturally, the brilliance could not stop Shuji and Fairy Xingyu's thoughts. Although they were a little surprised that the spiritual gall would suddenly disappear when it was still some distance away from the Kunlun mirror, they were not personally controlling the Kunlun mirror after all, so they could not say anything. Seeing that the Kunlun mirror had taken the spiritual gall, Shuji's heart was immediately relieved. He said loudly, "Xiaohua, quickly take a look at the Kunlun wonderland." "Yes, senior." Xiaohua's mind took back the spiritual gall and immediately shook the Kunlun mirror. The Kunlun mirror shook violently in the air as if it was ill. At this time, after listening to Shuji's words, Xiaohua agreed and took the opportunity to enter the space. Hey! Sure enough. Xiaohua's mind entered the space and instantly noticed the changes in the space. He fell into a new space and turned into Jade Archive Xiaohua. He closed his eyes slightly and felt the spiritual energy between heaven and earth that was different from that of Shenhua continent. He said to himself, "This space is born from the spiritual gall, and it is also the place where the spirits live. Let's call it the spiritual realm. I just don't know what's the difference between this spiritual realm and the 10,000 demon realm." Jade Archive Xiaohua stood in the air and felt the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the spiritual realm becoming more and more abundant. He looked at the many spirits happily absorbing the spiritual energy with the help of their bodies. A harmonious and peaceful aura emanated from Jade Archive Xiaohua and slowly filled the entire spiritual realm. After a while, Jade Archive Xiaohua came out of the spiritual realm. Xiaohua raised his hand and the aura of the spiritual realm fell on the Kunlun mirror. The shaking of the Kunlun mirror slowly stopped. Xiaohua said with a smile on his face, "Senior, fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. The spiritual gall has stabilized in the Kunlun wonderland, and it seems that there are changes that I don't know about. If you want to take it out now, you can't." "Good." Shuji clapped his hands and said, "This is good. With the spiritual gall, these spirits in the lost realm will have a good place to go. Xiaohua, take out the Kunlun mirror. Xingyue and I will help you." "Haha, many thanks, seniors." Xiaohua laughed heartily and waved his hand again. The Kunlun mirror rushed into the air and expanded to several kilometers in size. While Xiaohua was activating the Kunlun mirror, Fairy Xingyu said a few words. However, as her voice fell, it turned into a white crane in midair. Fairy Xingyu raised her hand and tapped the top of the white crane's head. A red light appeared on the top of the white crane's head. The white crane spread its wings and let out a clear cry. It soared into the sky and disappeared in a moment. Boom boom boom. As Shuji's hands moved, a huge crystal light suddenly appeared in the void. At the center of the crystal light, there were wisps of thin silver. Wang, wang, wang. Crystal light appeared around the Kunlun mirror and rushed into it. The Kunlun mirror let out a buzzing sound and rapidly expanded. In a few breaths of time, it was hundreds of miles wide. Fairy Xingyue smiled and said, "I'll help you too." As her voice fell, Fairy Xingyue formed a seal with both hands. A crescent moon rushed toward the surface of the Kunlun mirror like a sickle, and a cluster of starlight followed behind the crescent moon unhurriedly. Puff puff. The crescent moon and starlight crashed into the Kunlun mirror. Woo woo. A huge whirlpool appeared on the surface of the Kunlun mirror. The whirlpool gradually filled the entire surface of the mirror. A powerful suction force was generated from the whirlpool, covering all the spiritual bodies within several hundred miles. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. There was no suspense at all. One by one, the spirits crashed into the vortex. Xiao Hua did not dare to be negligent. He hurriedly activated the Kunlun mirror to absorb the spirits that rushed into the Kunlun wonderland. Sure enough, as Fairy Xingyue had said, in just a moment, the Kunlun mirror began to shake. A large number of spirits rushed in, causing a change in the Kunlun wonderland. Xiao Hua was anxious. He hurriedly released his mind and created another vortex at the vortex of the Kunlun mirror, drawing these spirits into the spiritual realm of the space. Fortunately, these spirits were somewhat similar to the vengeful spirits that Xiao Hua had collected in the hidden immortal continent. Although Xiao Hua was a little caught off guard, he was not flustered. At first, he was unfamiliar with it, but in a moment, he was familiar with it. Seeing that the spirit bodies nearby had been collected, Shuji called out again, "Xiao Hua, you come with us and quickly collect all the spirit bodies in this spatial fragment. Who knows when a spatial fragment that has lost its spiritual gall will shatter?" "Okay." Xiao Hua's spirit soared as he rushed into the air and said, "Today, being able to join hands with the two seniors is the happiest thing in my life. With the help of the two immortals, Shuji and Fairy Xingyue, although the number of spirits absorbed into the spiritual realm this time was 100 times more than before, the speed was not slow. In particular, Xiao Hua had deliberately released the aura of the spiritual realm in the Kunlun mirror. All the spirits, even some beast spirits, did not resist and were obediently absorbed into Xiao Hua's space. While Xiao Hua and the others were busy, the disciples of Zhai Xinglu were not idle either. They flew to different parts of the space fragment, collected all the spirits, and handed them to Xiao Hua in the end. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu moved. When the disciples of the Confucian family heard the news, they also came to help. Not to mention that sending all the spirits in a space into the Kunlun mirror was a grand occasion in their lives. Even if they helped these spirits who were on the verge of death escape, it was a merit that they were willing to do. The disciples of the aristocratic families of Confucian cultivators might not know how Wenxing cultivated, but the disciples of the four aristocratic families, Dongfang Yushan, Shimen Hangyue, Nangong Pingping, and Beiming Qi Han, had vaguely learned some secrets from their elders. They knew very well how rare the merit of teaching was. They also knew that this kind of merit might not be comparable to the merit of teaching, but after all, this was a life-saving action. These orthodox disciples of Confucian cultivators were also very willing to do it. Therefore, no one was slacking off, and no one was concealing anything. After Xiao Hua, Shu Ji, and Fairy Xingyu collected the countless spirits, the disciples of Zhai Xinglu and the disciples of Zhai Xinglu also brought over the spirit wood and other spirit materials they had collected. Xiao Hua accepted them with a smile. His impression of the four aristocratic families had changed a little. After busying themselves, Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyu led the disciples back to the flying boat. Xiao Hua took Little Silver and flew around the space fragment again. After a thorough inspection, he returned to the flying boat with relief. The flying boat was now stopped in the air. Above them was a meteor belt, and there were more starlight fragments than before. When Xiao Hua flew back, Fairy Xingyu was frowning and looking at the starry sky, as if she was having a hard time deciding. Xiao Hua had already said that he would leave the choice to Fairy Xingyu this time. He didn't want to investigate, but when he thought about how Fairy Xingyu was just a softie at heart, he rolled his eyes and opened his delusion breaker magic eye again. Sure enough, in his magic eye, the boundary storms in the starry sky were very complicated. There were no obvious signs of safety in the storms near each space fragment. Xiao Hua looked at them for a moment, then asked in a low voice, "Senior, this meteor belt is really hard to choose. Do you have any good suggestions? Didn't you find anything special?" Fairy Xingyu didn't answer, but asked another question instead. Xiao Hua was puzzled. He shook his head and said, "I didn't find anything special. I just found that the boundary storms near these space fragments are similar. It seems that it won't be easy to choose any of them. If that's the case, why should I worry? I just need to pick one at random." Fairy Xingyu rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua. "What I'm worried about now is how to find the space fragment with the transmission channel in this starry sky." Ah! Xiao Hua was puzzled. He looked at the meteor belt again and asked, Senior, do you mean that there might be a space fragment in this starry sky that can directly pass through the meteor belt? Yes. Fairy Xingyu nodded and said, we have encountered this starry sky several times before. There were 2 times when we were lucky enough to find the space fragment that could directly pass through the meteor belt. However, those 2 times were by chance. It seems that there is nothing special about this space fragment. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then nodded and said, if that's the case, I'll take another look and see if I can help you. If you can really find it, I'll really admire you. Fairy Xingyu said in disbelief. She simply leaned close to Shu Ji and sat cross-legged on the flying boat. At this time, the disciples of Zhai Xinglu were sitting around Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyu. The disciples of the Confucian aristocratic family were standing on the periphery. The celestial imperial flying boat was huge, so it didn't seem crowded even with tens of thousands of people standing there. Xiao Hua opened his Dharma eye again and carefully looked at the space fragment. Since he already knew that he was looking for a space passage, he naturally didn't need to pay attention to the realm storm. He spent a full 2 hours looking at the space fragments near him one by one. A smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. These space fragments all had different splendors and colors. However, if there were only black and white splendors, there were 4 more in this starry sky. Of course, the black and white splendors in these 4 space fragments were very obscure. It was not easy to identify which one was the transmission passage. However, when he carefully looked at the realm storm around these 4 space fragments, Xiao Hua keenly saw that one of the realm storms on the left had condensed into the shape of a vortex. If there was no accident, there should be a passage in this space fragment that led to the other side of the meteor belt. Xiao Hua didn't say it out loud. Instead, he asked respectfully, Senior, have you found anything? I think 3 of them are more likely to be found. Fairy Xingyu didn't stand on ceremony. She pointed to 3 starlights of different shapes and said, if you are not confident, the 3 of us will each lead 3 groups of disciples into these 3 space fragments. Xiao Hua naturally knew that this was the method that Fairy Xingyu had used previously. He smiled and said, Senior, I think that fragment is more interesting. Oh, why? Fairy Xingyu looked at it for a moment. There was also a faint silver light mixed with starlight between her eyebrows. Then, she asked in confusion. Xiao Hua naturally wouldn't answer truthfully. He only smiled and said, because the lines of that space fragment are more special. When Fairy Xingyu heard this, she couldn't help but take another look. The space fragment that originally didn't have any special features was really special when Fairy Xingyu looked at it carefully. It actually looked like Chapter 45-38. Bah! Fairy Xingyu spat at Xiao Hua and said, why are all men so filthy? Ah! Xiao Hua was just saying it casually. How could he see anything? He did not know the origin of this filthy thought. However, he was only surprised for a moment before he smiled and said, Senior's heart doesn't seem to be pure. What I said doesn't seem to be what you think. Page, forget it. Fairy Xingyu waved her hand and asked Shu Ji, what do you think? Listen to Xiao Hua. Shu Ji seemed to have great confidence in Xiao Hua. All right then. Fairy Xingyu did not refute. She raised her hand and took out another astrolabe from her bosom and handed it to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua, if you are right, the exit of this transmission channel is opposite the meteor belt. However, the transmission channel in the void fragment is natural and the direction of transmission is changeable. When we get there, we may not be in the same place. This is a magic treasure refined by Shu Ji. It can be activated with a thunderbolt. Take it. When you get there, you can find us. Okay. Xiao Hua took the astrolabe and carefully put it away. I understand. Then Fairy Xingyu looked at the flying boat under her feet and said, if it is a transmission channel, I'm afraid this immortal imperial equipment can no longer be used. If the transmission channel inside is not stable, the immortal imperial equipment of the heavenly court will crash the transmission channel. After saying that, Fairy Xingyu said loudly, disciples, listen to my command. Get off the flying boat and get into formation. Yes. The disciples of Zhai Xinglu answered and got off the flying boat. The disciples of the aristocratic families did not dare to delay and hurriedly flew off the flying boat. Most of the disciples of the aristocratic families lined up. Dongfang Yushan and a dozen other people activated their secret techniques at the same time. A dozen strange multicolored lights fell on the flying boat. The flying boat gradually shrank to the size of a palm. Dongfang Yushan raised his hand and stuffed it into his bosom. Fairy Xingyu did not talk nonsense. Just like before, she raised her hand and took out the astrolabe. Groups of flying birds flew out of the astrolabe again and flew toward the spatial fragment that Xiao Hua had pointed out. "I'll take the lead." Xu Ji did not wait for Xiao Hua to speak. He floated up and flew out on the flying birds. Xiao Hua touched his nose and said with a smile, "Since Senior is taking the lead, I'll finish the rest." "Yes." Fairy Xingyu responded and gave orders to the Zhai Xinglu disciples with great familiarity. The Zhai Xinglu disciples followed Xu Ji. After the star-picking tower disciple flew away, Fairy Xingyu nodded at Xiao Hua and flew away. Junior thanks Daoist Master Xiao. Dongfang Yushan and the other aristocratic family disciples were all very happy when they saw Xiao Hua raise his hand to signal them to fly up. After saluting Xiao Hua one after another, they flew towards the meteor belt. This meteor belt was the same as before. It was also a dangerous place. Nearly 100 disciples of Zhai Xinglu were accidentally swept into the spatial storm. Dozens of people from the scholarly families also met with misfortune. Under such circumstances, even people as strong as Xu Ji and Fairy Xingyu were powerless to help. Xiao Hua could only watch, unable to help. Xiao Hua was the last one to rush into the grey brilliance. What greeted him was a huge void. This void was filled with black and white spatial ripples. Xiao Hua's figure had just appeared when the void immediately collapsed like tofu. Then, a crooked and seemingly very fragile spatial passage appeared. Xiao Hua even saw layers of spatial vortexes rushing into the depths of the void within the spatial passage, and the Confucian cultivator disciple who had just entered had already disappeared without a trace. That's true. Xiao Hua released his soul consciousness and probed the teleportation passage. He thought to himself, if that immortal imperial equipment flew directly over, it would first break through this passage. Perhaps the space would collapse and all of us would be wiped out. Although the teleportation passage was a little fragile, it was safe. Xiao Hua flew out of this crooked passage without any danger. When his eyes flashed, the starry sky disappeared. What greeted him was an extremely strange place. This place was like a large hall and also like a mountain range. There were vague mountain ridges in the surroundings that were immersed in an inexplicable darkness. Even someone as strong as Xiao Hua could only release his spiritual force to a distance of 10,000 feet. Any further and he seemed to encounter a hard stone wall that he could not break through. Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat as he hurriedly probed the space. Indeed, as Fairy Xingyu had said, he could no longer sense the space. Damn it! Xiao Hua frowned and cursed under his breath. He took out his astrolabe again. He was a little doubtful. He could not even sense the space. Would Xu Ji's Dharma treasure be useful? Is that Senior Xiao in front? Just as Xiao Hua was about to use Unstoppable Thunderbolt, the space in the darkness not far away rippled slightly, and then a black and white brilliance surged out, and a figure familiar to Xiao Hua appeared from the brilliance. Wasn't that Zhu Qing? Zhu Qing had just calmed down when he saw Xiao Hua. He could not help but be surprised and delighted. When Xiao Hua saw that Zhu Qing had arrived here after him, he somewhat understood. He knew that the teleportation passage not only sent everyone in different directions, but also at different times. Hearing Zhu Qing speak, Xiao Hua nodded and said, "Yes, it's me." "That's great." Zhu Qing was very happy. He flew over and bowed. "Junior greets Senior Xiao." Seeing Zhu Qing bow respectfully again, Xiao Hua felt a wave of discomfort behind his neck. He smiled and helped Zhu Qing up. "Zhu Qing, I am going to meet up with your palace lord. If you are willing, you can come with me." Zhu Qing got up and smiled apologetically. Junior cannot help where the palace lord is going. Junior will not go with Senior. Oh! Xiao Hua was surprised. He smiled and said, "Then where are you going? Is it where all the disciples of Zhai Xinglu go? I will let Senior know." Zhu Qing answered honestly. "Long before coming to the Thousand Demons Sacred Realm, my palace lord has already said that as long as we pass through the meteor belt, we will have to rely on our own fortuitous encounters. She will not interfere anymore. Of course, she has been to Xingyue Palace several times and has already scouted out the less dangerous places around here. She has also told us about the places that are helpful to our cultivation. Junior and the rest of us can find our own places to train according to our own circumstances. When Xingyue Palace appears again, we can go out as we wish." "I see." Xiao Hua nodded. "Then I will not bother you anymore." At this point, Xiao Hua's heart skipped a beat, and he asked again, "Oh right, where you train, can you use cosmos bags?" "Some places can, some places can't," Zhu Qing answered. "This is Junior's first time here, so I am not very clear about the details." "Good," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "I understand." As he spoke, Xiao Hua formed a seal with his left hand and activated the thunderbolt technique in his body. A thick bolt of lightning landed on the astrolabe. The astrolabe flickered a few times, like a candle in the wind, and was quickly extinguished. There was no way to know where Shuji and Fairy Xingyue were. Xiao Hua thought for a moment and kept the astrolabe. He said, "In that case, I will go with you to take a look. After all, I have brought some disciples with me. I can't let them come here for nothing. Senior, please." Zhu Qing had already seen the power of Xiao Hua's Kunlun mirror and naturally thought that Xiao Hua had brought his disciples to Xingyue Palace. Seeing that Zhu Qing was still so polite, Xiao Hua had no choice but to say, "Zhu Qing, I don't know where you are going to train. You should lead the way." "Yes, Senior." Zhu Qing obeyed the rules and agreed. She looked around and flew in a certain direction. After flying for a few miles, the number of Zhai Xinglu disciples around them began to increase. These disciples were originally a little nervous, but when they saw that Xiao Hua was here, they felt relieved. Xiao Hua was a little puzzled. He looked around at the Zhai Xinglu disciples who were flying with their heads down and asked Zhu Qing, "It's dark here and we can't use our divine consciousness. How do you know where to go?" Zhu Qing raised his hand and pointed to a curve in the darkness in the distance. He smiled and said, "Senior, please look. This is a mountain range. Our Xingyue Palace calls this mountain range Floating Wave Mountain Range. There are countless palaces built on it. These palaces also have a name, Lost Star Palace. Every palace in this Lost Star Palace is as big as the space fragment we encountered earlier. We just need to get close to the mountain range and find any palace." "Oh." Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at the seemingly right but actually wrong mountain range, and casually replied. Then, he turned his head to look behind him. Sure enough, the place behind him was a stretch of darkness, and the meteor belt from before had already disappeared. There was an indescribable heaviness in this darkness. Wherever one's gaze fell, it was as if they would sink into it. The mountain range seemed to be right in front of them, but Xiao Hua and the others flew for a full hour and still did not see the promised palace. Xiao Hua tried again with his divine consciousness, but it still could not reach far. He was a little impatient. After all, he had an appointment with Shuji. He could not be sure that the place he and Zhu Qing came to was the same as Shuji's. He unconsciously stopped. "Senior." Zhu Qing noticed that Xiao Hua had stopped and immediately stopped as well. He asked, "Is something the matter? This Xiao has an agreement with your palace lord. This Xiao will not go to the palace in front," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "This Xiao hopes that you will have a good opportunity." Zhu Qing was a little disappointed, but he still said respectfully, "Lord Palace Lord's matter is more important. Senior had better hurry and meet up with Lord Palace Lord. Junior's matter is nothing. If there is no opportunity this time, there will be another chance next time. Senior." The Zhai Xinglu disciples beside him were also disappointed. They hurriedly said, "Floating Wave Mountain Range may not be far ahead. If we want to enter Floating Wave Mountain Range, we have to pass through the strange beast enclosure. Junior's strength is limited. If we encounter the strange beasts in the strange beast enclosure, our lives will be in danger. Senior, Please take pity on us and send us there. Everyone. Zhu Qing hurriedly said. Senior Xiao is still in a hurry to help Lord Palace Lord. We can't waste any more time here. Senior Xiao, since we are already so close, there is actually no need to waste any more time. These disciples seemed to know that Xiao Hua was soft-hearted and ignored Zhu Qing. They spoke pitifully to Xiao Hua. Chapter 45-39. Xiao Hua thought for a moment, then asked Zhu Qing, how far is it from here to the floating wave mountain range? Zhu Qing hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm not sure. But according to the palace master, it takes at least an hour to reach the floating wave mountain range from the meteor belt. The specific situation depends on the location of the meteor belt. Millimeter. Xiao Hua nodded and took out his astrolabe again. Unfortunately, he still couldn't activate it and couldn't determine the direction of Shu Ji, Fairy Xingyu, and the others. Xiao Hua looked at the floating wave mountain range, then looked behind him, and asked, Zhu Qing, other than the floating wave mountain range, where else do you know? I don't know. Zhu Qing shook his head. What about you? Xiao Hua asked the others. Like Zhu Qing, they only knew about the Lost Star Palace. Forget it. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, since I can't contact your palace master, I can only go to the Lost Star Palace first. Hearing Xiao Hua's decision, not to mention the disciples of Zhai Xinglu, even Zhu Qing was happy. Who didn't want a Mahayana cultivator by their side? Everyone bowed and said, thank you, senior. Now that he knew the direction and that there was a strange beast circle ahead, Xiao Hua naturally flew at the front and was on high alert. However, after flying for a while, more and more disciples of Zhai Xinglu gathered from all directions. There was only darkness and a kind of desolate coldness. There was no strange beast circle like Zhu Qing and the others had mentioned, nor was there any mysterious restriction like Shu Ji had mentioned. However, looking at the moving mountain range in the distance, Xiao Hua's heart gradually grew heavy, because a very strange feeling came from the darkness. This feeling was like a big hand was constantly moving around Xiao Hua, causing Xiao Hua's senses to constantly float, making it hard for him to control himself. Roar, roar, roar. Suddenly, the silent darkness began to produce the roars of beasts. With the roars, the darkness became filled with a desolate presence. Strands of powerful presences flashed through the sky again and again. All of the sounds and auras seemed to have come from a single step, causing Xiao Hua to be startled. He hurriedly released his divine sense. Unfortunately, his divine sense was only able to extend for a few dozen meters before it was suppressed by some unknown aura. Aoo, aoo, aoo. Just as Xiao Hua was probing, from the distant darkness, came the sound of hissing and miserable shrieks, mixed with the sound of ripples and explosions. Senior. Zhu Qing hurriedly said in a low voice, we've already entered the beast enclosure. The palace lord once said that the beasts here are as powerful as great sages of the Yarrow clan. Ordinary beasts can easily kill great Yarrow like Tun Ri. She brought us through the meteor belt, which is to enter the Lost Star Palace from the other side of the exotic beast circle. We might encounter fewer exotic beasts there. As for those screams, they were probably from the greater demons of the demon race. They didn't take a detour through the meteor belt and directly entered the beast enclosure. Naturally, they had a higher chance of encountering the beasts. The old man's suggestion to us was to conceal ourselves and pass through quickly without caring about anyone else. All right, got it. Quickly hide yourselves and pass this test. Xiao Hua nodded and urged them. He already had a feeling that a very strange aura had quietly formed in the surroundings. Zhu Qing and the others didn't dare to be negligent. They each activated their divine abilities and flew into the depths of the darkness at their fastest speed. Xiao Hua tapped his glabella. As a green light flashed, his delirium breaker Dharma eye opened. However, wherever his Dharma eye looked, Xiao Hua frowned again. This was because the entire darkness was filled with fine ripples. Not only did these ripples block the light in the distance, but they also made Xiao Hua's Dharma eye feel dizzy. This was something Xiao Hua had never encountered before. At this moment, a hair-raising aura suddenly appeared out of thin air and swept past a few hundred meters to Xiao Hua's right. Xiao Hua hurriedly turned his head, but his Dharma eye didn't see anything special in that direction. Ah! Immediately after, a miserable shriek came from where the aura landed. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly closed his dizzy Dharma eye and swept it with his naked eye. He saw a Zhai Xinglu disciple's body being torn into several pieces, blood and flesh splattering all over the ground. What kind of invisible strange beast is this? Xiao Hua turned pale with fright and tensed up in confusion. It's actually so powerful. Even my Dharma I can't see it. Seeing that the strange beast was so powerful, Xiao Hua's figure shrank rapidly. He raised his hands slightly and released his divine consciousness as much as possible. The other Zhai Xinglu disciples, such as Zhu Qing, fled in panic, not daring to stay for even a moment. Ah! Ah! Immediately after, several miserable shrieks sounded from the darkness in the distance. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly flew up and grabbed at the direction of the shrieks with both hands. Boom! Layers of strange golden ripples appeared in the space about 10,000 feet to the left. These ripples were like two large hands, but they were separated from each other. Moreover, each layer produced several layers of illusory images. Although the entire space was controlled by Xiao Hua's transcendence energy, Xiao Hua keenly sensed that between these illusory images, there were even more overlapping layers of space. His transcendence energy couldn't control these spaces. Looking at the place where Xiao Hua's large hands passed by, the corpses of 4 human cultivators and a demon were revealed. They had long been split into several pieces. However, in a moment, within the space that Xiao Hua had confined, there was no trace of the strange beast at all. Xiao Hua's eyes turned rapidly. A layer of cold sweat formed on his back. This strange beast was really too strange. It was also at this moment that Xiao Hua's figure flew past that a faint illusory image flashed past. If Xiao Hua hadn't released his divine consciousness to the limit and carefully scanned the surroundings, he wouldn't have discovered it. Xiao Hua was surprised. Hey! What kind of illusory image is this? Looking at its position, it seems to be where the Zhai Xinglu disciple died. Could it be the soul of that disciple? Thinking of this, Xiao Hua urged his figure to go to that place to investigate. Ah! Ah! Another wave of beastly roars of the demon being killed. Xiao Hua couldn't help but raise his head slightly and look in the direction of the sound. Swoosh! A strange aura, like several gusts of wind, sprayed out from a huge beast's mouth and appeared near Xiao Hua. Once Xiao Hua sensed it, his figure moved and used the wind escape technique. Several layers of illusory images flashed past in an attempt to evade. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua had only just moved his figure. Ka. In the void that was almost sticking to Xiao Hua's body, a dozen invisible forces suddenly appeared and struck Xiao Hua's back. A metallic sound rang out from the surface of Xiao Hua's body, and a series of sparks flew up. Damn it! Xiao Hua was very cautious, but he was still attacked by a strange beast. He couldn't help but be enraged. He cursed angrily and his right hand struck the void with a boom. The place where his fist landed immediately shattered the space within a radius of several feet. As the space collapsed and revealed itself, Xiao Hua's fist also pierced the void. However, the strange thing happened again. There was nothing in the void at all. Those dozens of murderous forces seemed to have appeared out of thin air. The invisible strange beast was still invisible. Xiao Hua's attack actually missed. Xiao Hua was helpless. How could Zhu Qing and the other Zhai Xinglu disciples be a match for a strange beast that even he couldn't kill? It was no wonder that Fairy Xingyu had warned Zhu Qing and the others not to care about others as long as they hid and escaped. However, seeing that the strange beast was unable to break through the surface of his body, Xiao Hua was relieved. He pondered for a moment, then his figure flashed and he chased in the direction that Zhu Qing and the others had flown. At this moment, roar, roar. Waves of blood-curdling screams sounded in the distance and not too far away, just as Xiao Hua had flown 100 zhong away, aoo. Behind Xiao Hua, where he had just been ambushed, a dozen indistinct shadows with sharp barbs flashed past. Immediately after, A series of extremely long and miserable screams resounded from behind the shadows. Xiao Hua, who was already prepared, immediately flew backward and reappeared in the space where he had just been standing. At this moment, Xiao Hua clearly saw that behind where he had just been standing, a phantom several hundred feet in size flashed past in the space. Some parts of the phantom were folded, and some parts were disjointed. The phantom also had dozens of crab claws that twisted and danced. Of course, just as the phantom danced, a huge fist with golden light hit the center of the phantom. The phantom was immediately smashed to smithereens the moment it came into contact with the golden light. However, the smithereens flashed in the light of the void and could no longer be seen clearly. Isn't this the punch that this Xiao had just sent into the void? I clearly didn't hit the strange beast. Why did it only appear now? Ayo! Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. This Xiao understands. The space that Xiao Hua was in was different from the space that the strange beast collar was in. No, it wasn't that the space was different. It was that the space was the same, but the time was different. Of course, the space at different times should also be different. The strange beast's space seemed to be slower than this Xiao's space. When the strange beast saw this Xiao, it immediately attacked. The strange beast's attack passed through an unknown space and hit this Xiao. This attack obviously wasn't in this Xiao's space, so this Xiao didn't have any time to dodge. This Xiao's physical body is strong, but the other disciples aren't. They were all killed. This Xiao immediately counterattacked. This Xiao's fist passed through an inexplicable gap in space and struck the exotic beast. Although the exotic beast was killed, there was no reaction within this Xiao's space. Only when the exotic beast's time was up did the phenomenon of the exotic beast being killed appear. Ayo, it doesn't seem that way. This Xiao's thoughts are contradictory. Damn, isn't this the law of time? This strange beast collar was too terrifying, and this ancient Star Moon Palace was too strange. This Star Moon Palace is an ancient ruin. Chapter 4540. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization. No, Fairy Xingyu is wrong. The Star Moon Palace is not an ancient relic. If the Star Moon Palace was an ancient relic, how could the Yi Qiong heavenly mansion of the immortal world be in the meteor belt? The Star Moon Palace must have another origin. The Star Moon Palace is probably not an ancient relic as Fairy Xingyu guessed. Oh, that's not right either. Since the Star Moon Palace has the law of time, it might be entangled with the ancient times. It's not strange that the Yi Qiong heavenly mansion fell into the meteor belt with the ancient 10,000 demon realm fragment, right? Forget it. Xiao Hua was helpless in the end. As he flew, he thought, I've only comprehended some time fragments and haven't even comprehended the spatial laws. What's the use of thinking about it now? Let's go to the Lost Star Palace first. However, since I can see that there's the law of time here, how can Shuji and Fairy Xingyu not see it? Why didn't they remind the disciples of Zhai Xinglu? Thinking of this, Xiao Hua laughed again. So what if Fairy Xingyu told the disciples about the law of time? Even if she told them that the attacks of these strange beasts would come earlier than they knew, so what? They have no power to fight back at all. It's better not to tell them. Now that he knew the secret of the strange beast's attacks, Xiao Hua's mind worked quickly. In this spacetime, whether it was the great demons of the Thousand Demon Sacred Realm, Zhu Qing and the other disciples of Zhai Xinglu, or even Xiao Hua himself, they had no power to fight back in the face of the strange beast's attacks from another spacetime. However, Xiao Hua also had a corresponding countermeasure. Of course, he could not get ahead of the law of time, nor could he change this law. However, he could warn or defend himself, Zhu Qing and the other disciples. Catcher! As Xiao Hua waved his hands, countless crystal lights fell into the void. The power of thunder was born in the darkness, enveloping the nearby space and protecting Zhu Qing and the other disciples who were flying around. However, he had only just managed to protect it. Swoosh! Immediately, a strange aura appeared around several disciples. Xiao Hua knew that this was the strange beasts from the strange beast pens attacking through the spacetime mezzanine. He had no choice but to circulate his magic power and observe the effects of the defense. Sure enough, as soon as the aura was born, the powerful power of thunder shattered it. There were even some lightning swords piercing into the void. Of course, there was no movement. Xiao Hua ignored it. He and the other disciples and continued to fly forward. As expected, after flying Yu and the other disciples, Yu and the other disciples to the strange Yu was Yu and the other disciples Yu. In the next half a cup of tea's time, there were no more strange beasts causing trouble for him. Xiao Hua escorted Zhu Qing and the other disciples safely to the so-called floating wave mountain range. As usual, Xiao Hua first activated the star plate, but seeing that the star plate still didn't move, Xiao Hua felt helpless. He turned to look at the floating wave mountain range. At this point, there were no longer any Zhai Xinglu disciples at the foot of the mountain range. Only the faint cries of agony and the cries of beasts could be heard in the distant darkness. He could not tell whether it was a great demon or a strange beast from the void. Xiao Hua pinched his chin and looked at the vague mountain range. He opened his illusion breaker Dharma eye again. What he saw with his Dharma eye was still the same as before. There were many fine lines, and behind the fine lines was another blurry world. At this time, Xiao Hua already understood. If he wasn't wrong, these lines should be the lines of the time laws. Behind these lines should be another space. A space that overlapped with the space where Xiao Hua was standing. Of course, when these fine lines fell into his transcendence vision gave birth to an indescribable dizziness, and Xiao Hua felt as if the world was spinning. Xiao Hua didn't dare to look any longer. Just as he was about to close his Dharma eyes, he vaguely saw that in the distant space, there seemed to be some golden threads surging like water ripples. Closing his Dharma eyes, Xiao Hua rested for a moment, then looked at the golden ripples. Wasn't it the shadow of the undulating mountain range? Xiao Hua was already used to it. He clearly knew that in this star-moon palace, most of his common sense would be overturned. He didn't need to look for the source behind the appearance at all. He just needed to stay alive and find Shu Ji and Fairy Xingyu. Ah! At this time, in the undulating darkness, another faint scream rang out, attracting Xiao Hua's attention. Xiao Hua was a little surprised. Zhu Qing and the others had said clearly that they would reach a safe zone after passing through the exotic beast enclosure. There weren't any special dangers in the floating wave mountain range. Even if there were pavilions bigger than spatial fragments, as long as they could enter, they could enter. There was no way to know what was inside the floating wave mountain range. If they couldn't enter, then they couldn't enter. It wasn't a matter of life and death. Immediately after, Xiao Hua urged his body, wanting to turn into a rainbow and fly out. However, the moment he moved, a strong resistance appeared in the surrounding space, blocking Xiao Hua's path. The faster Xiao Hua wanted to fly, the stronger the resistance became. Xiao Hua slowed down, and the resistance gradually disappeared. Interesting. Xiao Hua smiled faintly and slowed down his flying speed, flying towards the source of the scream. However, he saw layers upon layers of mountain-like silhouettes passing under him. When Xiao Hua's figure landed, the silhouette of the mountain-like silhouette was empty again, and another layer of silhouettes appeared under him. In short, Xiao Hua couldn't touch the so-called floating wave mountain range at all. Could this be another mountain range in another space? Xiao Hua laughed inwardly. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind like lightning. Xiao Hua's smile disappeared, and he came to a sudden stop. Looking at the mountain range in the distance, the mountain-like rocks under him, and the invisible exotic beast enclosure behind him, he cried out involuntarily, "Damn it, I understand now. Why can't I increase my flying speed in this space? That's because there's another space outside this space. The same place has two different times, and the only way to pass through these two spaces is to increase my flying speed." In other words, the obstruction this Xiao encountered when he was flying wasn't some kind of restrictive force, but the power of time. If my flying speed reaches a certain level, I'll be able to break through this obstruction, and I'll definitely reach the other space. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua thought of his own light escape technique. Similarly, If this Xiao wants to practice the light escape technique, he'll inevitably encounter a spatial barrier in an ordinary space. If this Xiao's flying speed is faster, I'll be able to break through this spatial barrier. Ayo, then, isn't that the immortal realm? If I'm sheltered in light, I'll be an immortal, that's how it should be. With this thought, Xiao Hua's heart couldn't help but be eager to give it a try. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the top of the mountain range. The true essence in his body began to slowly circulate, and layers of fine lightning appeared on the surface of his body. Boom boom boom. Suddenly, Xiao Hua moved. The lightning around his body flickered, illuminating the surrounding space. As the lightning flickered, the space-time resistance immediately appeared, as if a surging wave was surging from all directions, annihilating Xiao Hua's entire body. Xiao Hua's body slowly moved, and 4 layers of illusory images were also slowly born. After the 4 layers of illusory images were formed, Xiao Hua's body actually turned into a bolt of lightning. This bolt of lightning was first more than 10 feet long, similar to Xiao Hua's height. Then, the bolt of lightning rapidly elongated, rushing forward 10 feet, then 100 feet. Simultaneously, the bolt of lightning gradually became illusory, distorted, and broke into dozens of pieces. Every piece of lightning was pulled apart like a broken lotus root, and every piece seemed to be cut off by the void, but also seemed to be connected together. In addition, the rumbling of thunder was also elongated, and it gradually penetrated deep into the void. This phenomenon only lasted for a few breaths of time before the lightning suddenly shuddered. Without any warning, the bolt of lightning crossed over 1,000 feet and condensed on the other side. At the same time, Xiao Hua's body reappeared. Unlike before, Xiao Hua's body had already become 132 illusory specks, and it was as if he were about to fuse into the void. Unfortunately, just as 70% of the 132 specks disappeared, the remaining 30% trembled violently, and all of the specks that had disappeared before reappeared. Xiao Hua's entire body flashed like a wave of water, and he was completely revealed in mid-air once again. At this moment, large beads of sweat suddenly appeared on Xiao Hua's forehead, and his arm, which had been raised, drooped down powerlessly. How was this the aura of a human Grand Ascension stage being? Sigh, even though my lightning movement technique has already reached the phenomenal success stage, it's still not enough to break through the restrictions of time. The fine lines formed by time in space are even more powerful than the will of heaven and earth, and it looks like the lightning is about to break through these fine lines, but it still fell short in the end. Xiao Hua sighed, but his eyes flashed like starlight again, and he thought to himself, however, compared to before, my flying speed has increased significantly. If I can obtain the final essence of water and cultivate my wind movement technique to the phenomenal success stage, I should be able to break through the restrictions of heaven and earth. However, in the instant that I broke through space, I seem to have seen waves, right? Could it be that this star-moon palace is a reef in another space? Xiao Hua came to a sudden realization. Could it be that this star-moon palace is an immortal abode that opened up at the bottom of the sea? Ha ha ha, things in this world are really strange. Xiao Hua shook his head, and once again, he slowly moved his body and laughed. If it was a disciple of Zhai Xinglu like Xu Qing, he would probably never have imagined that this star-moon palace is actually something similar to an immortal abode in another space, at the bottom of the sea. P.S. Fellow cultivators who like this book, please come to Chidian to vote for recommendation, bookmark, and reward. Thank you for all your support. Chapter 45-41. Although Xiao Hua had yet to fly up the floating wave mountain range and see the so-called Lost Star Palace, everything he had encountered since the meteor had already given him a bountiful harvest. It was much more useful than traveling. When Xiao Hua flew out of the silhouette of the mountain range and arrived in the sky where he could see all the mountains, Xiao Hua smiled again. This was because the peak of the mountain range was not the peak of the mountain, but a wave-like hill. It was similar to the ripples he saw in the other space. However, the surging waves were frozen here, and there were countless palaces on top of the frozen ripple mountain range. In fact, instead of palaces, it would be better to call them reefs of different shape. These palaces were not built together, but scattered on the mountain peak. Each palace had a different appearance, and they did not even have the outline of a palace. Apart from the various colors of light that seeped out from the protrusions and depressions of these palaces, they were really not much different from reefs. There's no need to say more, Xiao Hua said helplessly. Since Fairy Xingyu called this star-moon palace, she would naturally call this ugly reef a star palace. I'm afraid she also felt that calling this ugly thing a star palace was a little far-fetched, so she called it Lost Star. Heh, a Lost Star palace. This reef looks like he's trying to be cultured. As he spoke, Xiao Hua's gaze fell on a spot on the mountain peak. There was the corpse of a fat monk lying there. Wasn't this the body that the Grand Mist ancestor had occupied earlier? At this time, the left arm of the corpse was gone, and the other parts were slowly melting away. Hehe, so the Grand Mist ancestor is also here. Xiao Hua immediately understood when he saw the body and said with a smile, I think with his ability, he won't die here. If I'm not wrong, he must have obtained the strange beast collar through other means. Moreover, when he arrived here, his body was severely damaged, so he had no choice but to attack other cultivators and occupy their bodies. However, I don't know which star palace he wants to go to. What kind of conspiracy does he have? While Xiao Hua was pondering, the body that the Grand Mist ancestor had occupied earlier slowly disappeared. It was unknown whether it had fallen into another space or was being corroded away. In any case, Xiao Hua didn't dare to reach out and touch it. Xiao Hua's gaze swept across the area. There were a few star palaces in the distance, but he couldn't see anything special about any of them. He also didn't know which star palace the Grand Mist ancestor would go to. Xiao Hua only paused for a moment, then casually flew in a direction. When he passed by a few star palaces, he casually landed in one of them. Just as he was about to approach the star palace, he saw that there were circles of distortions outside the star palace. These distortions formed a crooked, and there were even some mottled and empty vortexes in the middle. A faintly discernible suction force and resplendent starlight were born from the vortexes. Xiao Hua did not even think, and his body flickered with a protective golden light as he fell into the vortexes. At the same time Xiao Hua's figure landed in the star palace, the star palace beside him began to tremble violently. As it trembled, the entire star palace gradually twisted together like a fried dough twist. Then, circles of fluctuations rushed into the sky. The shadows within several hundred li of Xiao Hua suddenly lit up. This light was similarly distorted, broken, and mottled. After a few flashes of light, with a swish sound, it fell and covered the star palace. The light was like a star. It first floated outside the star palace, then seeped into the star palace, and disappeared in an instant. The light was like a pillar, and it mainly covered the star palace. The star palace that Xiao Hua had landed in, and the few star palaces to his left, also had light floating down. The interior of the star palace was an almost empty space. The sky was filled with mottled specks of light that had yet to take shape. On the ground, there were layers of solidified magma shadows. It was a pity that the magma did not have any heat. Although there was a lot of fiery red light flashing on the surface of the magma, they were all shadows, as if they were drawn in the void. In the middle of the sky and the earth, there was a man of ordinary build. If this man had one black and one white eye dug out, even if he was thrown into a crowd, no one would notice. However, because of these two eyes, he was no longer himself. He was the Grand Mist ancestor. Hee. The man let out a self-righteous chuckle. It's really here. This star palace that was born when the Grand Mist ancestor was born, and heaven and earth had yet to form. This is where I condensed my body and was reborn. Mother K, I've been hiding for so long, isn't it all for this day? Gauchen, Virokana, golden-winged Great Peng, do you think I'm afraid of you? I just don't have a physical body, so I can't unleash my abilities. And that Xiao Hua, do you think you're strong just because you're a Mahayana realm expert? After we leave the Star Moon Palace, I'll let you know who the #1 expert of the Tao Gate is. Your Soaring Dragon Mountain Range, your Fortune Gate's disciples, you'd better obediently hand them over to me, otherwise, I won't hesitate to kill you. After he finished speaking, the Grand Mist ancestor threw his head back and laughed. His laughter reverberated through the entire space. As the Grand Mist ancestor's laughter resounded, the space around him started to collapse, and the collapse rapidly spread through the entire space. Catcher! Streaks of blood appeared on the man's face. Following that, the man's scholarly robes turned into dust, and thumb-sized cracks appeared on his naked body. The cracks were so deep that they reached his bones. Boom! Black and white clouds appeared above the man's head and below his feet, and they converged in the middle. The man's body turned into dust with a loud bang. Such a weak body can't even withstand a single blow. If it wasn't for the fact that this old man had a fortuitous encounter in the Star Palace and obtained the method to condense a body from the Yin-Yang Illustrated Handbook, even if this old man was immortal, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the chance to rise again. Boom! Another thunderous boom rang out, and the black and white clouds finally collided. At the center of the clouds, a picturesque thing appeared. There seemed to be many drawings on it, and it also seemed to be blank. An indescribable light shone down from the sky, and tens of thousands of cryptic runes appeared on the picture. The runes were reflected in the light, and they turned into primal chaos phenomena, primordial chaos phenomena, desolate desolation phenomena, humanistic phenomena, and so on. The runes only floated up a few feet before they suddenly descended. The picture quickly condensed, and in a few breaths' time, a black and white human figure appeared where the picture had disappeared. Although the human figure was black and white, the black and white were mixed with the cryptic runes from before. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Just as the humanoid figure was formed, the space around it began to slice apart. Pieces of snowflake-like brilliance fell into the humanoid figure's body. The center of the humanoid figure gradually began to light up. When the humanoid figure was completely transparent, the black and white clouds began to churn. The white clouds gradually condensed into a green seal character, which was the word heaven. The black clouds also condensed into another green seal character, which was the word earth. As the two green seal characters appeared, the entire space fell silent. Two terrifying auras appeared out of nowhere, and they fell into the two words through space. Then, the chanting of gods and ghosts gradually filled the entire space. As the two terrifying auras fell, the transparent human figure in the center also gradually turned into a green seal character, which was the word human. When the word human appeared, it immediately stood tall and connected with the two green seal characters, heaven and earth. Boom! When the word human connected heaven and earth, the two terrifying auras also tangled together. The entire space trembled and rumbled, as if it couldn't bear the burden. Then, layers of spirals appeared in the space, tangling together from top to bottom. In just a moment, countless moonlight from outer space fell from the sky, falling into the white clouds of the word heaven. At the same time, the power of the stars from the other heavens also rushed out, falling into the black clouds of the word earth. Then, the power of the stars and the moon rushed into the word human in the center. Ka. The strange black and white lightning was wreaking havoc in the entire space. Every time the lightning flashed, the space would tremble, and the human character would grow in size. After a total of 81 times, the human character had grown to a size of 10,000 feet. Roar! The word heaven and the word earth let out a roar that had never appeared in the mortal world. The two terrifying auras disappeared like the tide, and then, the two clouds of mist fell on the top and bottom of the word human. Catcher! The clouds of mist disappeared, and the lightning above the word human also retracted. When the green seal characters shattered, a 1,000-feet-tall human figure appeared in the air. The human-shaped heavenly court was full and round, and its two pairs of thick eyebrows were like two flying swords. One of its eyes was slightly black, while the other was slightly white. However, when its gaze flashed past, an aura that could shake the world involuntarily appeared. Under the eyes, the nose was like a hanging gallbladder, and a dignified feeling was easily revealed. However, under his nose, his lips were too thin. The arrogance and sneer at the corners of his mouth all revealed ruthlessness and sneers, heartless and unrighteous. Ha ha ha! The human figure raised its head and laughed. It was the voice of the Grand Mist ancestor. I finally succeeded in condensing my body. The Grand Mist ancestor laughed for a long time, then looked down at his hands, feet, and body. A satisfied smile appeared on his face, And he whispered, the yin-yang illustrated handbook was right. A body formed with the help of the power of the stars is not an ordinary body, but the Xiantian Dao body. With this Xiantian Dao body, it is easier for me to communicate with heaven and earth. The origin energy of heaven and earth that ordinary people can't sense is a part of my Dao body. I can absorb the origin energy of heaven and earth as my own without refining it. In this way, even a dying child can cultivate to the nascent soul stage extremely quickly. As for me, my Dao foundation was formed long ago, and I just used this body to cultivate again. There are no bottlenecks in the cultivation process, and I only need to use the Dao pills that I have prepared long ago to return to the Mahayana stage. Ha ha ha, this Xiantian Dao body is not only the body of the human race, but also the body of the demon race. I don't need to refine it too much, and it is comparable to the body of a great demon or even a demon king. If I refine it for tens of thousands of years, I may not be inferior to the great sages of the Great Sage Hall. With such a foundation, it will be easy for me to control all the Dao sects in the world, and the revival of the Dao sects is just around the corner. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,